Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years now. I grew up on the reservation hearing my grandfather's stories about the Wendigo, the Ice Walker, the hunger that never dies. Back then, I thought they were just old stories meant to keep kids from wandering into the woods alone. I was wrong. It was February 1978, and the cold snap had been going on for 3 weeks straight. The thermometer hadn't seen anything above -20 in days, and that morning it hit -35. The kind of cold that makes your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth. The kind that kills you if you're not careful. I was sitting in the ranger station, warming my hands around a cup of coffee, when the call came in. 3 ice fishermen, the Peterson brothers and their friend Mike Chen, had been missing for 2 days. Their wives were frantic. They'd gone out to their usual spot on Basswood Lake, about 40 miles from the nearest road, deep in the Boundary Waters. "You can't go out there in this weather," my supervisor said over the phone. "It's too dangerous." But I knew those families. I'd grown up with the Peterson boys. Their kids went to school with my little sister. I had to try. The drive out took 4 hours on the snowmobile, following old logging trails that were barely visible under the snow. I brought Carl Hoffman with me. He was a veteran ranger, been doing this for 20 years. Good man to have in a crisis. We also picked up Tommy Beargrease, a local guide who knew these woods better than anyone. The thing about the deep wilderness in winter is how quiet it gets. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet, like the world is holding its breath. As we got closer to the lake, even the sound of our snowmobiles seemed muffled, swallowed up by something bigger than just snow and trees. "This is Wendigo country," Tommy said as we stopped to check our bearings. His breath made white clouds in the air. "My people don't come here during the hunger moon," Carl laughed. "Come on, Tommy. You don't really believe that stuff." But I saw the look in Tommy's eyes. He wasn't joking. We found their camp just as the sun was setting. The tent was still standing, their fishing gear laid out neat and tidy. But everything was wrong. The camp looked like it had been flash frozen. The coffee pot still sat on the camp stove, but the coffee inside was solid ice. Their sleeping bags were stiff as boards, covered in frost so thick it looked like fur. "Where are they?" Carl asked, looking around. That's when I saw the tracks. They were huge, bigger than any human footprint I'd ever seen. The stride was at least 12 feet, maybe more. But the strangest thing was how they looked in the snow. Most tracks sink down, but these looked like they'd been pressed into the ice by something impossibly cold. The snow around them was different too. Harder, more crystalline, like it had been frozen and refrozen 100 times. "Jesus," Carl whispered. "What made these?" Tommy was already backing away from the tracks. "We need to leave, now." But I was the lead ranger. It was my job to find those men. "We'll make camp here tonight," I said. "Search the area in the morning." That was my first mistake. As we set up our tent, the temperature kept dropping. Our equipment was acting strange. The compass spun wildly, pointing in different directions every few seconds. The radio crackled with static, but no matter how I adjusted it, I couldn't get a clear signal out. Then the wind stopped. I don't mean it got calmer, I mean it stopped completely. The trees went still. Our breath hung in the air like fog. Even the sound of our own heartbeats seemed too loud. "You feel that?" Carl asked. I felt it. Something was watching us. Something big and patient and hungry. At night, I dreamed of my grandfather. He was young again, standing in a circle of firelight, telling the old stories. But in the dream, his words were different. "The Wendigo doesn't just eat the body," he said. "It eats the warmth. It eats the life. It turns you into winter itself." I woke up to the sound of screaming. The screaming came from the lake. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out of the tent. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It had to be 50 below now, maybe more. My flashlight beam barely cut through the darkness, but I could see something moving on the ice. "Help us!" The voice was thin and desperate. "Please, help us!" Carl was right behind me, fumbling with his own light. "Is that them? Is that the Peterson boys?" Through the swirling snow, I could make out 3 figures on the lake. They were waving at us, calling for help. But something was wrong with the way they moved. Too stiff, too slow. "We're coming!" I shouted, and started toward the lake. Tommy grabbed my arm. "Don't." "What are you talking about? Those are the missing fishermen." "Look at them," Tommy said quietly. "Really look." I raised my flashlight and looked closer. The figures on the ice weren't moving right. They stood too straight, too still between their waves for help. And their voices, when I listened carefully, they all sounded exactly the same. "Help us!" they called again. "So cold! So hungry!" Carl was already putting on his snowshoes. "I don't care if something's wrong with them. We can't leave them out there." But as he stepped onto the ice, one of the figures turned toward us. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw its face. It was Mike Chen. I recognized him even though his skin was blue-white and his eyes were solid black. Ice crystals had formed in his hair, his eyebrows around his mouth. He looked like he'd been dead for weeks. "Carl, get back here," I yelled. But Carl was already 20 feet onto the ice. "Mike! Mike, can you hear me?" The Mike thing smiled. Its teeth were black with frostbite. "So hungry," it said, and its voice was like wind, through dead trees. That's when I saw the real Mike Chen. He was frozen solid about 10 feet to the left of the thing that looked like him, trapped in the ice like a bug in amber. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the sky, and his mouth was open in a silent scream. "Carl!" I screamed. "Get off the ice!" But it was too late. The temperature around Carl dropped so fast I could see it happening. The moisture in his breath turned to ice crystals that fell like snow. His movements got slower, more clumsy. The ice around his feet began to crack and groan. The Mike thing started walking toward him. With each step, the ice got thicker, whiter. More figures began to appear in the darkness. The Peterson brothers, or things that looked like them, moving with that same wrong, puppet-like walk. Carl fell to his knees. Can't move!" I grabbed the emergency flare gun from my pack and fired it at the Mike thing. The red light exploded across the ice, and for a moment I saw everything clearly. There were dozens of them, frozen people standing in the ice, some recent, some that looked like they'd been there for years. And moving between them, using them like masks, was something else. Something tall and thin and made of winter itself. The flare seemed to hurt it. The Mike thing let out a sound like breaking glass and stumbled backward. The temperature around Carl rose just enough for him to start moving again. "Run!" I shouted. Carl didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled back toward shore, slipping and sliding on the ice. Behind him, the frozen figures began to move faster, their movements becoming more fluid, more predatory. We made it back to the tent just as the flare burned out. In the darkness, I could hear them moving around us, circling like wolves. "What are they?" Carl gasped. He was shaking so hard he could barely speak. Tommy was packing our gear with quick, efficient movements. "Wendigo," he said. "The ice walker. It's been feeding here for a long time." "That's impossible," Carl said. "Those were just hypothermia victims. Hallucinations." "Then explain the tracks," I said. "Explain why Mike Chen was frozen solid in the ice while something that looked like him was walking around." Carl didn't have an answer for that. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the tent, listening to the sounds outside. Footsteps in the snow, whispers in voices we recognized. The scraping of something large and cold against the fabric of our tent. "Jake," my grandfather's voice called from outside. "Jake, come out here, boy. I want to tell you a story." I knew my grandfather had been dead for 3 years. When morning came, the sound stopped. But the cold didn't. If anything, it got worse. And that's when we found the first body. The body was frozen solid, sitting upright against a tree about 50 yards from our camp. At first I thought it was just another snow-covered log, But as we got closer, I could see the shape was wrong. It was one of the Peterson brothers. Danny, I think. He was sitting with his back against the pine tree, his arms wrapped around his knees like he was trying to keep warm. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead. Ice crystals covered his skin like a second layer of flesh. "How long has he been here?" Carl asked. I knelt down next to the body. The ice around Danny's mouth was red, blood that had frozen as it flowed. But the strange thing was, he didn't look like he'd been attacked. He looked like he'd just gotten cold. So cold that his body gave up. "This doesn't make sense," I said. "The human body doesn't freeze like this. Not this fast." Tommy was standing about 10 feet away, refusing to get closer. "The Wendigo doesn't just kill you," he said. "It takes your warmth, your life force, turns you into winter." "That's not how hypothermia works," Carl said, but his voice was shaky. I stood up and looked around. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no small animals, no wind. Just the sound of our own breathing and the occasional crack of a tree branch breaking under the weight of ice. "We need to find the other brother," I said, "and then we need to get out of here." But as we started walking deeper into the woods, following the trail of massive footprints, I noticed something else. The trees around us were wrong. They were covered in ice, but not the kind you get from freezing rain. This ice was thick and crystalline, like it had been growing there for years. Some of the trees looked like they were made of ice themselves, their branches twisted into impossible shapes. "Look at this," Carl said, stopping beside a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was what looked like a sculpture made of ice. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a sculpture at all. It was people. Dozens of them, frozen together in a massive block of ice. Men, women, children, all of them with their eyes open, all of them reaching toward the surface like they were trying to escape. "How many people has this thing killed?" I whispered. Tommy was backing away from the ice monument. "This is an old feeding ground," he said. "The Wendigo has been here for generations. It feeds during the hunger moon, when the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest." That's when I heard the voice. "Jake." I turned around. Standing at the edge of the clearing was my grandfather. He looked exactly like he had when I was 10 years old, tall and strong, with long gray hair and weathered hands. But his eyes were black, and when he smiled, I could see ice crystals on his teeth. "Grandfather," I said. "Come here, boy," he said. "I want to show you something." Carl grabbed my arm. "That's not your grandfather, Jake. Look at his feet." I looked down. My grandfather wasn't leaving any footprints in the snow, and the air around him was shimmering with cold, like heat waves in roars. Evers. "Jake," the grandfather thing said again, "don't you want to hear the old stories?" "He's dead," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "He's been dead for 3 years." "Death is just another kind of cold," the thing said. "Come with me. I'll show you how to never be cold again." Behind me, I heard Carl scream. I spun around and saw him standing perfectly still, his arms at his sides, his eyes wide with terror. Ice was forming on his skin, spreading up from his feet like a disease. In a matter of seconds, it had reached his chest. "Carl!" I ran toward him, but the cold hit me like a wall. The air around Carl was so frigid that it burned my lungs. I could feel the moisture in my eyes starting to freeze. "Can't move," Carl gasped. Tommy was chanting something in Ojibwe, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The Wendigo was playing with us, showing us its power. I grabbed the emergency radio from my pack and tried to call for help, but the cold had frozen the batteries. The screen was cracked, the antenna snapped off. We were on our own. The grandfather thing was still smiling. "The cold is freedom, Jake. No more pain, no more hunger, no more fear." "You're not my grandfather," I said. "No," it agreed. "But I wear his face so well, don't I?" The ice around Carl had reached his neck. He was trying to say something, but his mouth wouldn't move. His eyes were pleading with me to help him. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed one of our camp stoves and lit it, then held it as close to Carl as I could without burning him. The heat seemed to slow the ice's progress, but it didn't stop it. "Heat," I said to Tommy. "We need more heat." Tommy nodded and started gathering dead wood. We built a fire as fast as we could, the flames crackling and spitting in the impossible cold. The grandfather thing hissed and stepped back, its form becoming less solid. "This won't save you," it said. "I am winter itself. I am the hunger that never dies. I have been here since the first snow fell, and I will be here when the last human freezes to death." But the fire was working. The ice around Carl began to crack and melt. He gasped and fell to his knees, his skin red and raw but alive. "We need to get out of here," he said. But as we turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The other Peterson brother, Tommy Peterson, was standing right behind us. His throat had been torn out, and ice was growing out of the wound like a crystal flower. But he was still alive, still moving, still looking at us with those black, hungry eyes. "Hello, Jake," he said in a voice like breaking ice. "Want to play?" The Tommy Peterson thing lunged at us with movements that were too fast, too fluid for something that should have been frozen solid. I grabbed Carl and dove sideways, rolling away from those grasping, ice-covered hands. "The fire!" I shouted to Tommy Beargrease. "Keep the fire going!" But Tommy was already moving, spreading the burning logs into a wider circle around us. The flames hissed and sputtered in the unnatural cold, but they held. The Peterson thing circled us like a wolf, staying just outside the ring of light. "You can't hide behind fire forever," it said. "The cold always wins in the end." Carl was shaking so hard he could barely stand. "What does it want?" "It wants to feed," Tommy said. "The Wendigo feeds on warmth, on life. It's been asleep under the ice for years, waiting for the right conditions. This cold snap woke it up." As if summoned by his words, more figures emerged from the trees. I recognized some of them. Hikers who had gone missing over the years, hunters who never came home. All of them moving with that same wrong, puppet-like walk. All of them with those black, hungry eyes. "How many?" Carl whispered. "Dozens," I said. "Maybe hundreds." The circle of frozen people was getting tighter. Our fire was burning lower, and we were running out of wood. In the distance I could hear something else approaching, something big, something that made the ground shake with each step. "The real Wendigo," Tommy said. "The Ice Walker itself." It emerged from the trees, like a nightmare made of winter. 15 feet tall, maybe more, with limbs that were too long and joints that bent in ways that hurt to look at. Its skin was pale blue-white, like ice that had never seen the sun. Its eyes were black holes in its skull, and when it opened its mouth, I could see rows of teeth made of frozen bone. "I remember you," it said to Tommy, its voice like wind through a graveyard. "Your grandfather tasted sweet, full of stories and warm blood." Tommy raised his rifle. When had he drawn that? And fired. The bullet hit the Wendigo in the chest, but instead of blood, ice crystals sprayed out. The creature looked down at the wound with what might have been amusement. "Iron and fire," it said. "The old ways. But I am older than your old ways." It breathed on our fire, and the flames turned blue, then white, then died completely. The cold rushed in like a living thing, and I felt my body temperature drop so fast that my vision blurred. "Now," the Wendigo said. "Who dies first?" But I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not like this. I grabbed the flare gun from my pack and fired it directly at the Wendigo's face. The red light exploded across its features, and for the first time, the creature screamed. It was a sound like breaking glass and dying animals, and it made my ears ring. "The flares," I shouted to Carl. "It doesn't like the heat." We had 3 flares left. Carl fired one at the circle of frozen people, and they scattered like leaves, their forms becoming less solid in the red light. Tommy fired his rifle again, this time at the Wendigo's leg, and black ice sprayed out like blood. The Wendigo was angry now. It lashed out with one massive arm, catching Tommy across the chest. I heard ribs crack, and Tommy flew backward into a tree. He hit the trunk with a wet thud and slid down, leaving a trail of red in the snow. "Tommy!" I ran to him, but I could see it was too late. His eyes were already glazing over, and ice was forming around the wound in his chest. "The old stories," he whispered. "Remember the old stories." And then he was gone. The Wendigo turned its attention to me and Carl. We were down to 2 flares, and the creature was learning to avoid the light. It moved differently now, more carefully, staying just outside the range of our weapons. "What do the old stories say?" Carl asked. I tried to remember my grandfather's words. The Wendigo was winter itself, the hunger that never dies. It fed on cold and death and despair. But there had been something else, something about fire, I said. Not just heat, fire that burns from the inside out. The Wendigo laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "You think your little flares can hurt me? I am the cold between the stars. I am the ice at the bottom of the world." But I wasn't thinking about the flares anymore. I was thinking about the emergency thermite charges we carried for breaking through ice in rescue operations. They burned at over 4,000 degrees, hot enough to melt steel. "Carl," I said quietly, "do you still have your thermite?" He nodded, understanding immediately. "1 charge, but we'd have to get close." "I'll distract it," I said. "You get behind it." The Wendigo was moving toward us now, confident in its power. The frozen people were closing in from all sides, and the temperature was dropping so fast that I could see ice crystals forming on my own skin. "You cannot escape winter," the Wendigo said. "You cannot escape the cold." "Maybe not," I said, raising the last flare. "But I can try." I fired the flare directly at the Wendigo's chest. It roared and stumbled backward, giving Carl the opening he needed. He sprinted around behind the creature and pressed the thermite charge against its spine. "Now!" he shouted. I dove for cover as the thermite ignited. The explosion was blinding, and the heat was so intense that it melted the snow for 50 feet in every direction. The Wendigo screamed, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. And then silence. The Wendigo's body lay in a pool of melted ice and superheated steam. But even as I watched, the edges of the wound were already starting to freeze over. The creature wasn't dead. It was just hurt, badly hurt, and it would need time to recover. "Is it over?" Carl asked. I looked around at the forest. The frozen people had collapsed when the Wendigo fell, but they were still there, still trapped in their ice prisons. The trees were still covered in that unnatural crystal growth. The cold was still there, waiting. "No," I said, "it's not over. It's just sleeping." We found our snowmobiles and got out of there as fast as we could. The ride back to civilization was a blur of snow and wind and the constant fear that something was following us. When we finally reached the ranger station, I was so cold I couldn't feel my hands or feet. The official report blamed the deaths on the extreme weather. Hypothermia, they said. Exposure. The bodies we found were shipped off to Minneapolis for autopsy, and the case was closed. The area was quietly restricted during winter months. No camping, no hiking, no ice fishing. But I knew the truth. And sometimes on the coldest nights of the year, I still dream about those black eyes and that voice like breaking ice. Carl transferred to a station in Florida 6 months later. He never talked about what happened in the woods, but I noticed he kept his house at 80 degrees year-round. He died of a heart attack 5 years later, but the paramedics said they'd never seen anything like it. His body temperature was normal, but his blood had ice crystals in it. I stayed in Minnesota. Someone had to watch that place to make sure no one else went missing during the hunger moon. Every February, when the temperature drops below zero and the wind howls through the pines, I think about Tommy's words. The old stories, true. All of them. And the Wendigo is still out there, waiting for the next cold snap, the next group of travelers foolish enough to venture into its territory. It's patient. It has all the time in the world. Winter always comes back. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm here to tell you, If you're ever in the deep woods during the hunger moon and you hear voices calling for help in the darkness, don't go to them. Some hungers are never meant to be fed. My name is Frank Redwood, and I've been a ranger for 17 years. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, found hikers who got lost and never made it home, and pulled bodies from frozen lakes. But nothing prepared me for what happened in October 1983, deep in the Superior National Forest. I was 42 then, built like a tree stump from years of hiking rough country. My partner Rex, a German shepherd with more sense than most people, had been with me for 6 years. That dog could track a mouse through a thunderstorm and never once led me wrong. He was my eyes and ears in the wilderness, and I trusted him more than my own instincts. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Bill Axelrod, foreman of a logging crew working the remote northern section, sounded rattled on the radio. "Frank, we got a problem up here. My boys are spooked bad. They say something's been watching them, following them around." "What kind of something?" I asked, already reaching for my jacket. "Wolves, they think. But wolves that, well, they walk funny. Stand up like men sometimes." I nearly laughed. City crews always got jumpy their first month in deep woods. "Bill, you know how shadows play tricks." "Frank." His voice cut through the static. "3 of my best men won't go back to work. These aren't green kids. Tom Kruger's been logging 20 years, and yesterday he came running back to camp white as snow. Said he watched a wolf stand up on 2 legs and look right at him." Rex lifted his head from his bed, ears perked. Even he seemed to sense something in Bill's voice. "I'll be up there in 2 hours," I said. The drive took me through country I knew like my own backyard. Thick pine forests, old logging roads, and scattered lakes that stayed frozen until May. As we got closer to the site, Rex started acting strange. He'd been relaxed in the passenger seat, but now he kept looking out the window, sniffing the air. His ears stayed up, alert. "What's got you worried, boy?" I scratched behind his ears, but he didn't settle down. Bill's camp sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. 5 men stood around a dying fire, smoking cigarettes and talking in low voices. When my truck pulled up, they all turned to look. I'd worked with most of them before. Good men, experienced woodsmen. But today they looked nervous. "Frank!" Bill walked over, relief clear on his weathered face. "Glad you're here. Boys, tell Frank what you saw." Tom Kruger, a big man with arms like tree trunks, stepped forward. "Mr. Redwood, I know how this sounds, but yesterday, about half a mile north of here, I was checking a cutting area. Heard something moving in the brush. Figured it was a deer." He paused, looking embarrassed. "I turned around, and there was this wolf. Biggest damn wolf I ever saw. Gray and black, probably 7 feet long. But Frank," he shook his head, "it was standing up, on 2 legs, looking at me like it was thinking." Rex whined softly beside me. I looked down and saw something that made my blood run cold. My dog, who'd faced down bears without flinching, was trembling. "How long did it watch you?" I asked. "Maybe 10 seconds. Then it dropped down to 4 legs and ran off. But Frank, I swear it was smiling." The other men nodded. They'd all seen things. Shadows that moved wrong, tracks that didn't make sense, sounds like wolves talking to each other in the distance. "We need to check this out," I said. "Bill, I want you to come with me. And Mary Wyndham. Is she still in the area?" Mary was a tracker, half Ojibwe, who knew these woods better than anyone. She lived in a cabin about 10 miles south and sometimes helped with search and rescue. "She's at her place," Bill said. "Want me to radio her?" "Do it. Tell her to meet us at the north cutting area in an hour." As we gathered our gear, Rex stayed close to my leg. He kept looking toward the tree line, his nose twitching. In all our years together, I'd never seen him scared of anything. But right now, he was acting like something out there was hunting him. The afternoon sun was already getting low when we loaded into my truck. October days are short in northern Minnesota, and I wanted to get a look at these tracks before dark. But as we drove toward the cutting area, Rex began whimpering. "Easy, boy," I said, but my own skin was starting to crawl. The forest felt different today. Too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no wind through the trees. Just silence so thick it seemed to press against the windows. When we reached the cutting area, Mary was already there, crouched next to a massive pine stump. She looked up as we approached, and I saw worry in her dark eyes. "Frank," she said quietly, "you need to see this." Mary pointed to the ground near the stump. In the soft earth, clear as day, were tracks. But they weren't like any tracks I'd ever seen. They started as normal wolf prints. 4 paws, each one the size of my hand. But after about 10 feet, something impossible happened. The tracks changed. The rear paws became longer, more like feet. The front paws lifted off the ground entirely. For 20 yards, the tracks showed only 2 feet, walking upright like a man. "That's not possible," Bill whispered. Mary stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. My grandmother told stories about these tracks. She called them skinwalkers, wolf spirits that could change shape. Rex sniffed at the tracks and immediately backed away, hackles raised. He'd never done that before. Not once in 6 years. "There's more," Mary said. She led us to a pine tree about 8 feet tall. Deep gouges ran down the bark, starting at the very top and going all the way to the ground. Whatever made these was standing on 2 legs when it did it. I measured the gouges with my hands. They were 3 inches deep, carved into living wood. No normal animal could do that. "Could be a bear," Bill said, but he did. I didn't sound convinced. "Bears don't walk on 2 legs for 20 yards, Mary replied, "and they don't leave claw marks 8 feet high." We followed the tracks deeper into the forest. Rex stayed close, whimpering whenever we got too far ahead. The sun was getting lower, and shadows were stretching between the trees. But the tracks were easy to follow. They seemed to want us to follow them. After about a quarter mile, we came to a clearing. In the center was an old logging cabin, abandoned for maybe 30 years. The roof had partly collapsed and vines covered the walls. But what caught my attention was the door. It hung open, and something dark was smeared across the wood. "Jesus," Bill muttered. "Is that blood?" Mary knelt by the doorframe, studying the dark stains. "It's old, maybe a week." She looked up at us. "But there's something else. Look at the ground around the cabin." Tracks circled the building like a pack had surrounded it. But these weren't normal wolf tracks. They were the same impossible prints we'd been following. Some on 4 legs, some on 2, like the creatures had been changing back and forth. Rex refused to go near the cabin. He planted his feet at the edge of the clearing and growled low in his throat. In all our years together, I'd never seen him refuse to follow me anywhere. "We should look inside," I said, but my voice sounded shaky. "Frank," Mary said quietly, "my grandmother used to say that when the spirits mark a place, you don't go in. You leave offerings and walk away." "This is 1983, Mary. We don't have spirits. We have animals, and animals can be tracked and dealt with." But as I walked toward the cabin, Rex barked once, sharp and urgent. I'd heard that bark before. It meant danger, real danger. I stopped and looked back at my dog. He was staring at the forest behind us, every muscle tense. Then I heard it too. A howl, long and low, come, ing from the trees. But it wasn't quite right. It sounded too intelligent. The howl was answered by another from our left, then another from our right. We were surrounded. "Back to the truck," I said. "Now." But as we turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood freeze. At the edge of the clearing, just visible between the trees, stood a wolf. It was massive, bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen, and it was watching us with yellow eyes that looked almost human. As we stared at it, the wolf slowly rose up on its hind legs. It stood there for a moment, 7 feet tall, then tilted its head like it was studying us, like it was thinking. Then it smiled. I swear to God it smiled. Rex barked again, and the thing dropped to 4 legs and vanished into the trees. But the howling continued, coming from all around us now. More voices than I could count, all talking to each other in some language that was almost like words. We ran back to the truck, Rex racing ahead of us, but as we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. Dark shapes were moving between the trees following us, and they were keeping up with the truck. "Frank," Bill said, his voice tight. "What the hell was that thing?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was out there, it wasn't a normal wolf, and it wasn't alone. That night back at the logging camp, none of us slept well. We kept hearing sounds from the forest, howls that sounded like voices, branches breaking under heavy footsteps, and something that might have been laughter. Rex stayed pressed against my leg all night, trembling. And sometime around 3 a.m, our radio crackled to life. Through the static, we heard what sounded like growling, but underneath the growling, barely audible, was something that chilled me to the bone. It sounded like someone calling for help. The next morning, Tom Kruger was gone. Bill found his sleeping bag empty at dawn, the zipper torn open from the inside. His boots were still there, but Tom had vanished into the forest wearing only his underwear and a t-shirt. The temperature had dropped to near freezing during the night. "He must have heard something," Bill said, but his voice was shaking. "Maybe got confused, sleepwalking." But Rex was acting like he'd caught a scent. He kept running to the edge of camp, then coming back, whimpering. Finally, I clipped on his leash and let him lead. The trail was easy to follow. Tom's bare footprints led straight into the forest, but they weren't alone. Wolf tracks followed alongside, sometimes overlapping the human prints. And after about 100 yards, Tom's footprints just stopped. "Where'd he go?" Bill asked. Mary was studying the ground, her face pale. "The wolf tracks continue, but they're different now. Deeper, like the animal got heavier." Rex was pulling hard on the leash, wanting to follow the wolf tracks. But every few steps he'd stop and look back at me with frightened eyes. He was torn between his training and his instincts. We followed the tracks for another quarter-mile. They led to a stream where we found Tom's torn t-shirt hanging from a branch. The fabric was shredded, and dark stains that looked like blood were dried into the cotton. "We need to call this in," I said. "Get a search team up here." But when we got back to camp, our radio was dead. The CB in my truck wouldn't work either. Even our backup radio just gave us static. "Something's jamming the signals," Mary said. "My grandmother talked about that too. The spirits don't like metal voices." "Stop with the spirit talk," Bill snapped. "This is a missing person case. We need real help, not folklore." But as the day wore on, it became clear that we weren't getting any help. The radios stayed dead, and the road out of the forest was blocked by a fallen tree that hadn't been there the day before. The tree was massive. It would take a crew with chainsaws to move it. "Storm must have brought it down," Bill said, but there hadn't been any storm. That evening we built a big fire and stayed close together. Rex wouldn't leave my side, and his ears never stopped twitching. He was listening to something out there in the darkness. Around midnight, we heard Tom's voice. "Help me," he called from the forest. "I'm hurt. I can't find my way back." Bill jumped up, grabbing a flashlight. "Tom, where are you?" "Don't," Mary said, catching his arm. "That's not Tom." "What do you mean it's not Tom? I'd know his voice anywhere." "Help me," the voice called again. But this time, it was coming from a different direction. "Please, I'm bleeding." Then we heard it from a third direction, and a fourth. Tom's voice, calling for help from all around us, but the words were slightly wrong, too clear, too perfect. Rex was growling now, a low rumble that never stopped. He was staring into the darkness, his whole body tense. "They're playing with us," Mary whispered, "trying to separate us." "Who's playing with us?" Bill demanded. That's when we saw the eyes, yellow points of light reflecting our fire, moving through the trees. Not one pair, dozens. They circled our camp, staying just outside the light, watching us. "Wolves," Bill said, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Wolves don't do this," Mary replied. Wolves don't imitate human voices, and they don't hunt in packs this big. The voices continued all night. Sometimes it was Tom calling for help. Sometimes it was other voices, men we didn't recognize, women, even children. All of them lost, all of them hurt, all of them begging us to come into the forest and help them. But we stayed by the fire, taking turns on watch. And every time I looked at Rex, he was staring at the same spot in the darkness, his hackles raised. When morning came, we found Tom. He was hanging from a tree about 50 yards from camp, wrapped in what looked like spider silk. But it wasn't silk. It was some kind of organic material, sticky and strong. Tom was still alive, but barely. His eyes were clouded, and he kept mumbling about the pack. "They're oming," he whispered as we cut him down. "They're coming for all of us. The pack always gets what it hunts." Bill tried to give him water, but Tom pushed it away. "Don't you understand? They let me live so I could tell you. They want you to know what's coming." "What's coming, Tom?" I asked. "The change," he said. "Tonight, when the moon rises, they'll come for you. And if they bite you..." He looked at his arm, where I could see puncture wounds that looked infected. "If they bite you, you become one of them." Tom died an hour later. Not from his wounds, but from something else. Something that made his body convulse and his eyes roll back. Before he died, he looked at me and smiled. And for just a moment, his teeth looked sharper than they should have been. Rex wouldn't go near the body. He kept backing away, whimpering. And when we tried to bury Tom, we found that the ground around our camp had been disturbed. Holes had been dug everywhere, like something had been marking territory. "We need to get out of here," Mary said. "Now." But when we went to my truck, we found that the tires had been slashed. Not by claws, by something sharp and precise. Something that understood how to disable a vehicle. "They're intelligent," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They know exactly what they're doing." As darkness fell, we heard them moving through the forest. Branches breaking, leaves rustling, and underneath it all, a sound like conversation. They were talking to each other, planning something. Rex pressed against my leg, trembling. For the first time in his life, my brave dog was terrified. And that's when I knew we were going to die. They came at us just after midnight. The first one walked right into our firelight. A wolf the size of a small horse, standing on two legs like a man. Its fur was gray and black, matted with dirt and blood. But its eyes were the sun part. They were intelligent, calculating, and completely focused on us. "Jesus Christ," Bill whispered, raising his rifle. The creature tilted its head, studying the gun. Then it smiled, showing teeth that were too long and too sharp. When it spoke, its voice was Tom's voice. "You can't kill us all," it said. "We are the pack. We are eternal." More shapes moved at the edge of the firelight. Wolves that walked upright, their front paws changed into something like hands. They surrounded us, cutting off every escape route. Rex was pressed against my leg, shaking so hard I could feel it through my boots. But he wasn't running. Even terrified, he was staying with me. "What do you want?" I asked. The leader, the one with Tom's voice, stepped closer. "We want you to understand. Your kind has forgotten the old ways. You've forgotten that you are prey." "We're not prey," Mary said quietly. "We're people. We have families. Friends who will come looking for us." "Like they came looking for Tom?" The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your radios are silent. Your road is blocked. No one knows where you are." Bill raised his rifle, but the creature moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. It was beside him in a heartbeat, its claws wrapped around the barrel. "Silver bullets," it said, studying the gun. "Yes, we know about those. But you don't have silver bullets, do you?" It was right. We had regular hunting ammunition, useless against whatever these things were. The creature released the rifle and stepped back. You killed our hunting ground with your machines and your noise. So we adapted. We learned to hunt you instead. You're not wolves, Mary said. You're something else. Something that was human once. We are what humans become when they remember their true nature, the leader replied. Tonight, you will remember too. That's when I noticed something about the other creatures. They weren't all the same. Some were fully transformed, standing upright with elongated limbs and claws. But others were in between, part human, part wolf, as if they were, is still changing. The bite, I said. It changes people. Eventually, the leader agreed. Some fight it longer than others. But in the end, everyone joins the pack. Rex suddenly barked, sharp and urgent. He was looking at the forest behind the creatures, his ears perked forward. For a moment, I thought he might be alerting us to more danger. Then I realized what he was sensing. These things were afraid of something. They kept glancing over their shoulders, nervous about something in the darkness behind them. Fire, Mary whispered. They're afraid of fire. The leader heard her and snarled. Fire is temporary, but the pack is forever. But I was already moving. I grabbed a burning branch from our campfire and swung it at the nearest creature. It jumped back, hissing, and I saw fear in its yellow eyes. The cabin! I shouted. Run for the cabin! We ran through the forest, the creatures following but staying back from the burning branch. Rex ran beside me, no longer trembling. He'd found his courage again. The old logging cabin was still standing, and I kicked in the door. Inside, I found what I was looking for, an old kerosene lamp, still half full. I smashed it against the wall, and the smell of fuel filled the air. Get ready to run, I told Mary and Bill. When I light this place up, we go for the truck. The tires are slashed, Bill reminded me. I've got a spare, I said. Rex, you stay with me, boy. The creatures were gathering outside, but they wouldn't enter the cabin. They could smell the kerosene, and they were afraid. This ends now, the leader called. You can't burn down the entire forest. Watch me, I said, and threw the burning branch. The cabin exploded in flames. The creatures scattered, howling in voices that sounded like screaming wind. But they regrouped quickly, and I knew the fire wouldn't hold them for long. We ran for the truck, Rex Leah. Ding the way. I had never changed a tire so fast in my life, but even with my hands shaking, I got it done. The engine started on the first try. As we drove away, I looked in the rear view mirror. The creatures were following, but they were staying on two legs now, loping through the forest like men, and they were keeping up with the truck. They're not giving up, Mary said. They can't follow us forever, Bill replied. But I wasn't so sure. These things were smart, organized, and they had all the time in the world. They could track us anywhere, wait for us to make a mistake, and then strike. Rex was in the passenger seat, looking out the rear window. He barked once, and I saw what he was warning us about. The creatures had spread out, trying to surround us. They were using pack tactics, just like real wolves. The road curved ahead, and I saw our chance. There was a steep drop-off on one side and a wall of rock on the other. If I could get through the narrow gap before they closed it, I floored the accelerator. The truck shot forward, engine roaring. Behind us, the creatures were converging on the road, but we were moving too fast. We made it through the gap and out onto the main highway. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creatures stop at the edge of the forest. They stood there, watching us disappear, but they didn't follow. We made it, Bill said, but his voice was hollow. I looked at Rex, who was still watching the forest. His ears were up, alert. He could still sense them out there, waiting. We made it out, I said, but they're still there. The official report blamed everything on rabid wolves. Tom Kruger's death was listed as an animal attack, and the logging operation was suspended for disease control. The forest was closed to the public for 6 months. But I know the truth. Those things are still out there, waiting for the next group of people to wander into their territory. And they're learning. Every encounter makes them smarter, more dangerous. I retired from the Ranger Service 2 months later. Couldn't do the job anymore. Every time I went into the forest, I saw yellow eyes watching from the shadows. Every howl in the distance sounded like human voices. And Rex was never the same either. My brave dog, who'd faced down bears and mountain lions without flinching, became afraid of his own shadow. He'd whimper at night, staring at the windows, waiting for something to come through the glass. He died 6 months later, his heart giving out from the stress. I think he died of fear. Bill Axelrod moved to Florida and never worked in the woods again. Mary Wyndham went back to her reservation and became a medicine woman, teaching the old ways to young people who'd forgotten them. She sends me letters sometimes telling me about other encounters. The pack is still active, still hunting. They've learned to avoid rangers now, but they still take loggers, hikers, and hunters, people who go into the deep woods alone. The authorities always blame bears or wolves, but I know better. Sometimes I get calls from other rangers, people who've seen tracks that don't make sense or heard voices in the forest that sound too human. I tell them what I can, but nobody wants to believe. It's easier to blame nature than to admit there's something worse out there. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in Idaho. He'd found a campsite where a family had vanished, leaving behind only their torn clothes and some unusual tracks. Tracks that started on 4 legs and ended on 2. "What should I do?" he asked. "Close the area," I told him. "Call it a bear attack. And whatever you do, don't go looking for them alone." But what if they're still alive? I thought about Tom Kruger, hanging from that tree, mumbling about the pack. "If they're still alive," I said, "they won't be human much longer." The ranger hung up, but I know he'll call back. They always do. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it, and once too. He pack knows you've seen them. They never really let you go. I still live in Minnesota, but I stay away from the deep woods. I have a small house in town, with good locks and bright lights. Sometimes at night I hear howling in the distance. It might be normal wolves, or it might be something else, but I never go to find out. Rex's old collar hangs on a hook by my door. Sometimes I think about getting another dog, but I know it wouldn't be fair. Any dog I owned would spend its life looking over its shoulder, waiting for the pack to come back. Because they're still out there, still hunting, still growing their numbers. And someday when I'm old and weak, they'll come for me. They remember everyone who's seen them and lived to tell about it. They remember everyone who's escaped their territory. The pack always gets what it hunts. It's just a matter of time. My name is Samuel Oakley, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. Before that, I cut down trees for a living. I know that sounds backwards, but sometimes life changes you in ways you never expect. What happened in the Redwood Grove that September changed me forever. I was 36 then, working out of the Redwood National Park office in California. The trees there are older than Jesus Christ himself, some of them 2,000 years old, thick as houses and tall as church steeples. When you walk among them, you feel small, real small, like you're in a cathedral built by God instead of man. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 members of a hippie commune had been found dead in the sacred grove. That's what the locals called it. The Yurok tribe had always said that place was special, that spirits lived there. Most of us rangers just thought it was pretty woods. I drove out there with my partner Jim, but he got called back for a family emergency. That left me alone with the bodies. The county coroner was a thin man named Peters, who sweated too much and talked too little. He kept wiping his face with a dirty handkerchief. "Never seen anything like this, Sam," he said, pointing at the first body. "Look at this." The dead hippie was a young woman, maybe 25. She was sitting upright against a massive redwood, but something was wrong. Her skin looked like old leather, dried out and brown. Her clothes were faded and torn. But the strangest part was how the tree bark had grown around her legs, like the tree was trying to swallow her. "How long you think she's been here?" I asked. Peters shook his head. "That's the thing. Her friends say she was alive 3 days ago. But look at her. This body's been here for months, maybe years." The other 2 bodies were the same, mummified and hollow, with bark growing around them like they were becoming part of the trees. One man had bark covering his entire left arm. The other had tree roots growing through his chest. I'd seen plenty of death in my time. Bears, falls, exposure. But this was different. This felt wrong in a way that made my stomach turn and my hands shake. "We should get them out of here," I said. Peters nodded, but when we tried to move the first body, the bark cracked and bled. Not red blood, thick brown sap that smelled like Christmas trees and rotting meat. The woman's body was stuck to the tree, grown into it like she'd been there for decades. That's when I noticed the silence. In 14 years as a ranger, I'd never heard the forest so quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even our footsteps seemed muffled. The huge trees stood around us like sleeping giants, and I got the feeling they were watching us. I radioed for help, but the radio just crackled with static. My phone had no signal. Peter's equipment started acting up too. His camera wouldn't focus, and his measuring tools kept giving different readings. "We need to get out of here," Peter said, packing his gear with shaking hands. "I'll send a team with proper equipment." But as we walked back toward the trail, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The path looked different. The trees seemed closer together, like they'd moved when we weren't looking. And carved into the bark of the biggest redwood, I saw faces. Human faces, twisted in silent screams. Peters didn't see them. He was too busy loading his van and getting ready to leave. But I saw them clear as day. The faces of the 3 dead hippies pressed into the bark like they were trying to escape from inside the tree. I stood there for a long time after Peters drove away, staring at those faces in the bark. The forest stayed quiet around me, but I could feel something watching from the shadows between the trees, something old and patient and angry. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those bodies, about the bark growing around them, about the faces in the tree. I'd cut down hundreds of trees in my logging days, and for the first time I wondered if I'd made them angry. I went back the next morning with Dr. Helen Fern, an anthropologist from UC Berkeley who studied Native American folklore. She was a smart woman, maybe 40, with gray hair and serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She didn't believe in spirits or ghosts, but she knew the Yurok stories about the sacred grove. "The tribe has always said this place is alive," she explained as we hiked in. "They believe the oldest trees have souls, that they guard the forest from harm. It's just folklore, of course, but it might explain why those kids died here." "How do you mean?" "Fear can kill," she said. "If they believed the trees were angry with them, the stress could have caused heart failure. And the mummification could be from some kind of fungus that grows on the bark." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when we reached the sacred grove, the bodies were gone. Not moved. Gone. The spots where they'd been sitting were empty. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. Just clean patches of ground where the bark had been torn away from the trees. And the faces I'd seen carved in the bark were gone too. "This is impossible," Dr. Fern said, checking her notes. "The coroner said the bodies were grown into the trees. They couldn't just disappear." I knelt down and touched the ground where the woman's body had been. The earth was soft and warm, like something had been growing there. And mixed in with the dirt were small pieces of clothing, a bead from a necklace, a button from a shirt, a piece of leather from a boot. "They're still here," I said, "just not the way we left them." Dr. Fern gave me a strange look. "That's not scientific, Sam. Bodies don't just vanish." But as she spoke, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Voices. Quiet, muffled voices coming from inside the trees. Calling for help. Cries, begging to be let out. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Dr. Fern stopped talking and listened. For a moment, the forest was silent again. Then the voices came back, clearer this time. A woman's voice, scared and desperate. "Please help me, I can't move, I can't get out." "Jesus," Dr. Fern whispered. "Where's that coming from?" I pressed my ear against the bark of the nearest redwood. The voice was coming from inside the tree, deep inside, like someone was trapped in the wood itself. "Hello?" I called out. "Where are you?" The voice answered immediately. "In here! I'm in the tree! He pulled me in! Help me!" Dr. Fern pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is impossible," she kept saying. "Trees don't talk. People can't live inside trees." But the voices kept coming. All three of the dead hippies calling out from different trees around the grove. They sounded scared and confused, like they didn't understand what had happened to them. "How long have you been in there?" I asked. "I don't know," the woman's voice replied. "It feels like forever. Everything's dark. I can't move my arms or legs. And there's something else in here with me, something old and angry." That's when I noticed the bark moving. Not much, just a little. Like the tree was breathing, and the faces were coming back, pushing up through the bark like they were trying to break free. Dr. Fern saw it too. She dropped her phone and stepped back, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "We need to get them out," I said. "How?" she asked. "They're inside the trees, that's impossible." But I was already pulling out my knife, thinking about cutting into the bark. The moment the blade touched the tree, everything changed. The voices stopped. The forest went dead silent. And I felt something watching us from every direction. The trees around us creaked and groaned like they were waking up. The ground under our feet trembled, and carved into the bark of every redwood in the grove, I saw the same message appearing in letters that looked like they were burned into the wood. "Leave now, or join them." Dr. Fern grabbed my arm. "We need to go, now." But as we turned to leave, the path was gone. The trees had moved closer together, their massive trunks forming a wall around us. We were trapped in the sacred grove with whatever had taken the hippies. And from inside the trees, the voices started calling again. But this time they weren't asking for help. They were warning us. "Don't let them touch you," the woman's voice whispered. "Don't let them pull you in." We were trapped for 3 hours. I know that because I kept checking my watch, even though time seemed to move differently in the grove. Sometimes a minute felt like an hour. Sometimes an hour passed in what felt like seconds. Dr. Fern tried to explain what was happening. "Mass hallucination," she said. "Fear and stress can make people see things that aren't there. The trees aren't really moving. We're just disoriented." But I knew what I was seeing. The redwoods were alive in a way that trees shouldn't be. When I wasn't looking directly at them, they shifted and moved, closing in around us. Their bark rippled like water. Their branches reached down toward us like grasping hands. And the voices from inside the trees kept getting louder and more desperate. "He's coming," the woman's voice warned. "The guardian. He judges everyone who enters the grove. He decides who stays and who goes." "Who's the guardian?" I asked. "The first one," a man's voice answered. "The one who became the trees. He's been here since the beginning, protecting the forest. We failed his test. We weren't worthy." "What test?" But before anyone could answer, the trees started moving faster, not just shifting position, actually walking. Their roots pulled up from the ground like legs, and they began to circle us like predators. Dr. Fern screamed. She pressed herself against my back, her scientific explanations forgotten. "This isn't possible," she kept saying. "This isn't real." But it was real. The trees were hunting us. One of the smaller redwoods reached out with a branch and touched Dr. Fern's shoulder. The moment it made contact, her skin began to change. It turned brown and rough like bark. She looked down at her arm in horror as the change spread up toward her neck. "It's absorbing me," she whispered. "I can feel it. It's pulling me in." I grabbed her and pulled her away from the tree, but the bark-like skin kept spreading. Her arm was completely transformed now, rough and brown and hard as wood. She tried to move her fingers, but they wouldn't bend. "Sam," she said, her voice getting weaker. "I can feel it in my mind. The tree's thoughts. It's so old, so angry. It remembers everything. Every tree that's been cut down, every animal that's been killed, every piece of land that's been destroyed." The bark was spreading across her chest now, moving toward her heart. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. How do you fight a tree? "The guardian wants to judge you," Dr. Fern said, her voice becoming hollow and distant. He's been waiting for you, Sam. He knows what you used to do. He knows about all the trees you cut down. That's when I saw him. The Guardian stepped out from behind the largest redwood, and I understood why the tribe had always feared this place. He looked like a man, but wrong. His skin was bark, his hair was made of pine needles, and his eyes were dark holes that seemed to go on forever. He was tall, maybe 8 feet, and when he walked, small trees grew up from his footprints. "Samuel Oakley," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through leaves. "The tree killer. You have come to my grove." "I'm not a logger anymore," I said. "I protect the forest now." The Guardian tilted his head, and I heard the sound of branches creaking. "You killed 347 trees in your logging days. Do you remember them all?" I didn't remember the exact number, but I could feel the weight of every tree I'd cut down. The Guardian was making me remember. The sound of the chainsaw, the crack of breaking wood, the way the trees fell with a sound like thunder. "I was young," I said. "I didn't understand." "Understanding comes too late for the dead," the Guardian replied. "But perhaps you can serve a better purpose now." He reached out toward me with one wooden hand, and I saw my future in his dark eyes. I would become like Dr. Fern, part tree, part human, trapped forever in the grove. But I would be conscious, aware, able to think and feel, but never to leave. "The forest needs guardians," he said. "Those who have harmed it must serve it. This is justice." Dr. Fern was almost completely transformed now. Only her head remained human, and even that was starting to change. Her hair was becoming moss, her skin rough bark. "Don't fight it, Sam," she said. "It's not so bad. You can feel everything. Every bird that lands on your branches, every drop of rain on your leaves. You become part of something bigger." But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I still had my knife, and I still had something the Guardian might want more than my death. "I have an offer," I said. The Guardian stopped reaching for me. "Speak." "I know the forest better than anyone. I know where developers want to build, where loggers want to cut, where the threats are coming from. Let me stay human, and I'll protect this place. I'll keep people away." For a long moment, the Guardian stared at me with those dark, endless eyes. The trees around us swayed and whispered like they were discussing my offer. "You would serve willingly?" he asked. "Yes." "And if you fail? If you betray the forest again?" I looked at Dr. Fern, now completely transformed into a tree but still conscious, still aware. "Then I'll take her place." The Guardian nodded slowly. "We will test your commitment, Samuel Oakley. But first, you must prove your worth." The test was simple and terrible. The Guardian wanted me to choose. "Two groups approached the grove," he said, his voice like wind through dead leaves. "Developers who plan to cut down the old trees and build houses, and a family of campers who are lost and frightened. You can save one group, the other will feed the forest." I felt sick. "You want me to choose who lives and who dies?" "You want to protect the forest," the Guardian said. "This is protection. The developers will destroy hundreds of trees. The campers will harm none. Choose wisely." Through the trees, I could see both groups. The developers were 5 men in expensive clothes, carrying surveying equipment and chainsaws. They were laughing and joking about how much money they'd make turning the grove into luxury homes. The campers were a family, a mother, father, and 2 small children. They were scared and lost, calling out for help. The little girl was crying, and the mother was trying to comfort her. "I won't choose," I said. "There has to be another way." The Guardian's eyes flashed with anger. "There is always another way, but choices must be made. Inaction is also a choice." The trees around us began to move again, closing in on both groups. I could see the bark on their trunks opening like mouths, ready to swallow the humans whole. "Wait," I said. "Let me talk to them. Let me try to turn them away." And if they refuse to leave? Then we'll face that when it happens. The Guardian considered this. Very well, but if you fail, all of them feed the forest, and you join them. He gestured, and the trees parted, creating a path. I ran toward the developers first, thinking they'd be easier to convince. I was wrong. You can't be here, I told them. This land is protected. It's sacred to the local tribe. The lead developer, a fat man with a gold watch, just laughed. We have permits, Ranger. This grove is going to be 20 houses by Christmas, each one worth $2 million. The trees here are 2,000 years old, I said. They're irreplaceable. Everything's replaceable for the Tsiet. Right price, the man replied. Now get out of our way. He pushed past me and started walking toward the sacred grove. The other developers followed, revving up their chainsaws. I ran to the family next. They were easier to convince, too scared to argue. I told them the trail was dangerous, that there had been rock slides and wild animals. They believed me and headed back toward the main road. But the developers kept going. They reached the grove just as the sun was setting, and I could see the Guardian waiting for them in the shadows between the trees. Last chance, I called out. Leave now, and nobody gets hurt. The fat man turned around and grinned. Or what? You'll write us a ticket? That's when the trees started moving. Not slowly this time. Fast, like they were angry. The developers saw it too, and their expressions changed from confidence to terror in seconds. What the hell? One of them started to say, but a branch wrapped around his throat and cut off his words. The Guardian stepped into the clearing, and all 5 developers screamed. They tried to run, but the trees were everywhere, surrounding them, reaching for them with woody fingers. You came to kill the forest, the Guardian said. Now the forest will kill you. I watched in horror as the trees absorbed the developers one by one. Their bodies were pulled into the bark, their screams muffled by the wood. In minutes, they were gone, just like the hippies, just like Dr. Fern. But this time, I could hear their voices from inside the trees, and they weren't asking for help. They were screaming in rage and fear, trapped forever in wooden prisons. It is done, the Guardian said. The forest is protected. But I felt sick. Those men had been planning to destroy the grove, yes, but they were still human beings. They had families, people who cared about them, and now they were gone. This isn't justice, I said. This is murder. The Guardian turned those dark eyes on me. You object to our methods? I object to killing people. And yet you chose to save the family and sacrifice the developers. You made the same choice we did. I realized he was right. I had chosen. I'd decided that some people were worth saving and others weren't. The Guardian had just carried out my decision. But I can offer you a different path, he continued. Become our voice in the human world. Warn people away from the sacred places. Keep the destroyers from our forest. Do this, and no more will die. I looked at the trees around us, knowing that inside their bark were the conscious minds of all the people who had been absorbed. They would live forever, aware but trapped, part of the forest but no longer human. If I do this, I said, will you let Dr. Fern go? The Guardian was quiet for a long moment. She has become part of us now. She is content. Let me ask her. He nodded, and I heard Dr. Fern's voice from inside the nearest tree. I'm okay, Sam. It's strange, but I'm okay. I can feel everything the forest feels. Every season, every storm, every new growth. It's beautiful in a way I never expected. Do you want to stay? I think I do, she said. I understand now why the tribe called this place sacred. It's not just a forest. It's a living thing, ancient and wise and patient, and it needs protection. I looked at the Guardian. All right, I'll do it. I'll be your voice in the human world, but no more killing unless there's no other choice. Agreed, he said. But remember, Samuel Oakley, if you betray us, if you fail to protect the forest, you will join the others, and your consciousness will remain forever aware of your failure. As he spoke, the trees began to part again, creating a path back to the main trail. The test was over. I had passed, but the real work was just begin. Ning. That was 40 years ago. I'm 76 now, and I've kept my promise to the Guardian. I've turned away hundreds of developers, hikers, and curiosity seekers from the sacred grove. Most of them listen when I tell them the area is dangerous. A few don't, and they disappear into the forest. I tell myself it's not my fault, but I know better. The official story is that a toxic fungus grows in the old growth areas, causing hallucinations and death. The Park Service has restricted access to several groves, not just the sacred grove. It's easier than explaining the truth. I never married, never had children. My life has been the forest, protecting it from those who would harm it. I can feel the trees now the way Dr. Fern described. When I walk through the woods, I can sense their thoughts, their memories, their patient waiting. Sometimes I visit the sacred grove, and I can hear the voices of those who were absorbed. Dr. Fern is still there, still conscious, still part of the forest. She tells me about the things she's learned, the secrets of the trees, the deep history of the woods. The developers are there too, but they're different. Angry, bitter, never accepting their fate. They scream threats and curses from inside the bark, but the trees ignore them. They're just noise now, meaningless sound in an ancient place. I'm old now, and I know my time is coming. My replacement is a young woman named Sarah Chen, a botanist who specializes in old-growth forests. She doesn't know about the Guardian yet, but she will. When I'm gone, she'll hear the voices in the trees, and she'll have to make the same choice I did. The forest is patient. It can wait for the right person to come along. Someone who understands that some things are more important than human life. Someone who can make the hard choices and live with the consequences. I've written all this down so there's a record, so people will know what really happened in the sacred grove. But I know most people won't believe it. They'll think it's just the ramblings of a crazy old man who spent too much time alone in the woods. Maybe that's for the best. The forest doesn't need publicity. It needs protection. Last week I felt a pain in my chest that wouldn't go away. The doctor says it's my heart, says I have maybe a year left. I'm not afraid of dying, but I am afraid of what will happen to the forest when I'm gone. But the Guardian has been preparing for this. He's been reaching out to others, people who understand the importance of the old places. Sarah Chen is just the beginning. There are others, Native American activists, environmental scientists, even some former loggers like me who've seen the error of their ways. The forest is building its own network of human protectors, people who will keep the sacred places safe from development and destruction, people who will make the hard choices when they have to. I don't know if I'll be absorbed into the trees when I die, or if I'll just fade away like normal people do. But I hope I'll be able to stay somehow, to continue protecting the forest even after my body gives out. The sacred grove is still there, still guarded by the ancient trees and the consciousness they contain. The Guardian is still there too, patient and watchful, ready to judge anyone who threatens his domain. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the redwoods, I can hear all the voices singing together. Dr. Fern and the hippies, and even some of the developers, all part of the forest now, all part of something bigger than themselves. The trees remember everything. They remember the first humans who walked among them with respect and fear. They remember the loggers who came with saws and axes. They remember the developers who came with bulldozers and concrete. And they remember me, the logger who became a ranger, who chose to protect instead of destroy. My name is Samuel Oakley, and I am the voice of the forest. When I'm gone, one else will take my place. The trees will make sure of that. The forest is patient. The forest is eternal. And the forest always wins in the end. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park for 11 years. I moved to Arizona from Detroit when I was 18, running from the kind of city violence that steals your sleep and makes you jump at every shadow. The desert saved me. Out here, the silence is clean and the dangers are honest. Heat, flash floods, rattlesnakes. Things you can see coming. I was 29 that November when everything changed. The desert taught me that some shadows move when they shouldn't, and some silences hide things you never want to meet. It started with the missing hikers. Not missing exactly. They kept coming back. But they came back wrong. The first call came in on a Tuesday morning. 2 college kids from Phoenix, Jake and Amy, stumbled into the visitor center looking like they'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Their hair had streaks of gray that hadn't been there in their driver's license photos. Their skin hung loose, like they'd lost weight too fast. "The dogs," Jake kept saying, his hands shaking as he tried to drink coffee. "They followed us for hours, just watching." "What dogs?" I asked, pulling up a chair. "There aren't any wild dog packs in this area." Amy stared at the table. They didn't look right, like they were made of smoke, and they had these eyes. I'd heard strange stories before. The desert plays tricks on people. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, panic. They all mess with your head. But these kids had plenty of water, good gear, and they'd only been out for 2 days on an easy trail. "Where exactly did you see them?" I asked. "Near the old ruins," Jake said. "The ones with all the pottery pieces scattered around." That got my attention. The ruins were sacred to the Hopi people. We kept that area restricted, but hikers sometimes wandered off the marked trails. The pottery wasn't just scattered, it was arranged in careful patterns. The tribal leaders said it was part of an ancient burial ground, a place where the spirits of the dead watched over the living. "I need to check this out," I told my supervisor, Chuck Harrison. "If there's really a pack of feral dogs out there, people could get hurt." Chuck was a good boss, but he'd been in Arizona for 30 years and had heard every desert story there was. "Probably just coyotes," he said. "Maybe a few that got too comfortable around humans." I wanted to believe that. Coyotes I could handle. I'd grown up learning to track them, to understand their behavior. My brother Miguel had been killed by a pack of wild dogs when we were kids in Detroit. I'd made it my business to understand canines after that, their pack structure, their hunting patterns, their body language. It was part of why I'd become a ranger. But coyotes don't age people, and they don't arrange pottery in perfect circles. I gathered my gear that afternoon: radio, GPS, plenty of water, my camera, and the .40 caliber service weapon I'd never had to use on anything bigger than a rattlesnake. I also packed flares. In the desert, getting lost after dark could kill you faster than any predator. The drive to the trailhead took an hour on dusty back roads. November in the desert was perfect weather, clear skies, temperatures in the 70s, barely any wind. The kind of day that made you understand why people fell in love with this place. I parked at the old service road and started hiking toward the ruins. The trail was marked with stone cairns every 100 yards, but I could have found my way blindfolded. I'd been working this section of the park for 8 years. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Desert silence isn't like city silence. In the city, silence means something's wrong. No traffic, no voices, no life. In the desert, silence is natural. But this was different. No birds, no insects, no wind through the rocks. Even my footsteps seemed too loud. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it. A low howl, distant, but clear. It came from the direction of the ruins, maybe 2 miles ahead. I checked my watch. 4:30 in the afternoon. Plenty of daylight left. The howl came again, longer this time. Then another voice joined it. Then another. I'd heard coyotes sing before. This wasn't coyotes. The voices were too deep, too human, like people trying to sound like dogs. I kept walking, but slower now. The trail wound between red rock formations and stands of juniper trees. Normal desert country. But something felt wrong. The shadows were too dark, too sharp, and they seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. By the time I reached the ruins, the sun was getting low. The ancient stone walls cast long shadows across the desert floor. The pottery pieces were still there, arranged in 3 perfect circles around what looked like a central fire pit. But there were no dogs, no tracks, no scat, no sign that any animals had been in the area for weeks. I took pictures of everything, then started walking a search pattern around the ruins. The ground was soft sand and loose rock, perfect for holding tracks. If a pack of dogs had been here, I would have found evidence. That's when I saw the bite marks. They were in the sandstone walls of the ruins. Deep gouges, like something with massive jaws had been chewing on the rock itself. The marks were fresh, white stone showing through the red surface patina. I ran my fingers along the gouges. They were warm to the touch, even though the wall was in shadow. And they were big. Whatever had made them had a jaw span of at least 18 inches. The howling started again, closer this time. I spun around, hand on my weapon, but saw nothing. Just empty desert and dancing shadows. Then I saw the first set of eyes. They were watching me from behind a boulder, maybe 50 yards away. Yellow eyes, the size of dinner plates. They caught the last rays of sunlight and seemed to glow. I blinked, and they were gone. I radioed Chuck immediately. "I'm at the ruins. Found evidence of large predators, bite marks on the stone walls." Static answered me. I adjusted the antenna and tried again. Nothing but white noise. The radio had been working fine on the drive out. Now it was picking up nothing but interference, and underneath the static I could swear I heard howling. I started walking back toward the trail, moving faster now. The sun was touching the horizon, and desert darkness comes fast. Getting caught out here without light was not an option. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were pacing me, staying about 30 yards to my right. Soft padding sounds on sand, like bare feet. Or paws. I stopped and listened. The footsteps stopped too. I started walking again. The footsteps resumed, matching my pace exactly. "Hello?" I called out. "If someone's out there, I'm a park ranger. Are you okay?" No answer, but the footsteps got closer. I drew my weapon and held it ready. "This is your last warning. Identify yourself." A low growl came from the rocks to my left, then another from directly ahead, then a third from behind me. I was surrounded. "Okay," I said out loud, mostly to keep myself calm. "Just coyotes, big ones maybe, but still just coyotes." The first one stepped into view. It was definitely not a coyote. The creature was the size of a small horse, but built like a wolf. Its fur was black, but it seemed to shift and move like smoke. When it turned its head, I could see through it to the rocks behind. Its eyes were solid yellow light. "Jesus," I whispered. The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it opened its mouth and let out a sound that was part howl, part human scream. The sound went right through me, making my bones ache. Two more stepped out of the rocks, then a fourth. They formed a loose circle around me. "Just watch." And I kept my gun pointed at the largest one, but I had a sick feeling that bullets wouldn't do much good. These things looked like they were made of shadow and smoke. "What do you want?" asked. The lead creature took a step forward. Its paws made no sound on the sand, and when I looked down, I saw it wasn't leaving any tracks. That's when I understood. These weren't animals. They weren't even alive, not in any way I could understand. I thought about Jake and Amy, how they'd aged years in just a few days, how they'd looked drained, empty. The creature took another step closer. I could feel cold radiating from it, even in the warm desert air. And something else, a pulling sensation, like it was trying to draw something out of me. "No," I said firmly. "Stay back." It stopped, but didn't retreat. The others began to circle, moving like smoke over the sand. I started backing toward the trail, keeping my weapon trained on the leader. The creatures followed, but didn't attack. They were hurting me, I realized, keeping me moving in a specific direction, away from the trail, deeper into the restricted area. "I'm not going that way," I said. The creature behind me growled. When I turned to look, it was right there, close enough that I could have touched it. Its breath was visible in the air, like frost. I spun back to face the leader, but it had moved too. Now it was blocking my path to the trail completely. The sun was almost gone. In another few minutes, it would be full dark. That's when I heard the scream. It came from somewhere ahead, in the direction the creatures were trying to drive me. A human voice, full of terror and pain. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The shadow dogs all turned toward the sound. Their ears pricked up and they began to pant, like they were excited. There's someone else out here, I said. Someone who needs help. The leader looked back at me and made a sound that might have been laughter. Then it started walking toward where the scream had come from. I followed. What choice did I have? The creatures led me through a maze of rock formations to a small canyon I'd never seen before. It was narrow, maybe 20 feet across, with high walls on both sides. The bottom was filled with sand so fine it looked like powder. In the center of the canyon, a man was lying on his back. He was old, not just old, ancient. His skin was wrinkled and spotted, his hair pure white. His clothes hung loose on his shrunken frame. But according to the wallet lying beside him, he was Dr. James River, age 34. His university ID photo showed a young man with dark hair and smooth skin. "Oh God," I whispered. Dr. River was still breathing, but barely. His eyes were open, staring at the darkening sky. When he saw me, his mouth moved. No sound came out, but I could read his lips. "Help me." I knelt beside him, checking for injuries. No blood, no broken bones, but his pulse was weak and irregular. His skin was cold as ice. "What happened to you?" I asked. He tried to speak again. This time I heard a whisper. "They fed." The shadow dogs had formed a circle around us. They sat on their haunches, watching, waiting. "Fed on what?" I asked. "Life," Dr. River whispered. "They eat life." I looked up at the creatures. They were clearer now in the gathering darkness, more solid. Their yellow eyes were fixed on me, and I could feel that pulling sensation again, like they were trying to draw something vital out of my body. "How do I stop them?" I asked. Dr. River's eyes closed. For a moment I thought he was dead. Then he whispered one word: respect. The largest shadow dog stood up. It padded over to us, moving without sound. When it reached Dr. River, it lowered its head and breathed on him. The old man's hair turned completely white. His face collapsed inward. His breathing stopped. The creature turned to me next. I scrambled backward, raising my weapon. "Stay away from me!" The shadow dog paused, nodding its head. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. Not barked, spoke, in a voice like wind through dry leaves. "You disturb the sacred." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard stories about places where the dead spoke to the living, but I'd never believed them. The Hopi elders talked about spirits that guarded burial grounds, but I'd always thought they were just metaphors. "I'm not disturbing anything," I said. "I'm trying to help." "Help?" The creature's voice was getting stronger, more human. "You bring the stone scraper. You let him dig. You let him take." Stone scraper. It took me a moment to understand. Dr. River was an archaeologist. He'd been digging at the ruins. He was studying the pottery, I said, learning about the culture. The shadow dog let out a sound like laughter. "Learning. He takes. He steals. He scatters the bones of our children." The other creatures began to move closer. I could see more of them now, dozens, maybe hundreds, materializing out of the darkness. They filled the canyon, a pack of ghostly hunters with glowing eyes and smoky fur. "The bones sleep in patterns," the leader continued. "Sacred patterns. Stone scraper breaks them, scatters them. Our children cannot rest." I thought about the pottery arrangements around the ruins. Jake and Amy had said they were scattered, but when I'd arrived, they were in perfect circles. Someone, or something, had been putting them back. "I can fix it," I said. "I can put everything back the way it was." The creature studied me with those impossible yellow eyes. "You are not like Stone Scraper. You do not take, but you guide. You bring the takers to sacred places." It was right. I'd been leading archaeological teams to sites all over the park for years. I'd thought I was helping preserve history, but from the spirit's perspective, I was just another grave robber. I didn't know, I said. I'm sorry. Sorry? The creature's voice was getting angry. Sorry does not wake the dead. Sorry does not repair the sacred patterns. Sorry does not feed us. The pulling sensation was getting stronger. I could feel my energy being drawn out like water through a straw. My hair was starting to turn gray at the temples. What do you want? I asked. Balance, the creature said. Stone Scraper took. Now we take. Life for life. Energy for energy. Take mine then, I said. Leave the others alone. The shadow dog cocked its head. Others? That's when I heard the voices. Human voices calling for help. They were coming from different directions, echoing off the canyon walls. Help us, please. The dogs, they won't let us leave. I can't move. I looked around the canyon and saw them. People scattered across the sand, all in various stages of aging. Some looked like they'd been there for hours, others for days. All were being slowly drained by the shadow pack. How many? I whispered. 15 so far, the leader said. All who came to dig, all who came to take, all who disturbed the sacred patterns. I recognized some of them. Dr. Sarah Chen, a linguist who'd been studying ancient inscriptions. Mark Williams, a graduate student who'd been mapping the ruins. Lisa Thompson, a photographer who'd been documenting the artifacts. All of them were aging rapidly. All of them were dying. This has to stop, I said. Yes, the shadow dog agreed. When the debt is paid, when the sacred patterns are restored, when the bones of our children can rest. I looked at the creature, trying to understand. What if I could get everyone to stay away? What if I could make sure the ruins are never disturbed again? You would do this? Yes, but you have to let these people go. Let them live. The shadow dog was quiet for a long moment. The other creatures watched, their eyes glowing in the darkness. You would give up your work? Your purpose? I thought about my 11 years as a ranger, about all the people I'd helped, all the places I'd protected, about the archaeologists and researchers who depended on me to guide them safely through the desert. Yes, I said, if that's what it takes. The creature moved closer. I could feel its cold breath on my face. And if we are hungry again? If others come? If the sacred patterns are broken? Then I'll fix them, I said. I'll keep watch. I'll make sure the burial grounds are protected. The shadow dog studied me for what felt like hours. Then it nodded slowly. You will be guardian, like us, between the worlds of the living and the dead. I didn't understand what that meant, but I nodded anyway. Yes. The creature opened its mouth and breathed on me. The cold hit me like a physical force. I felt my life energy being pulled out, drawn into the creature's smoky form. My hair turned gray, then white. My hands became wrinkled and spotted. But then something strange happened. Instead of continuing to age, I felt the process reverse. The cold breath was putting something back, something different. I could feel myself changing, becoming something between human and spirit. When it was over, I looked down at my hands. They were young again, but there was something different about them. I could see through them slightly, like looking through morning mist. Now you are guardian, the shadow dog said. You will watch. You will protect. You will keep the sacred patterns whole. I looked around the canyon. The other people were gone, not dead, just elsewhere. Back where they belonged, I hoped. What about Dr. River? I asked. He chose to take, so we took from him. But his knowledge remains. You will need it. I felt a sudden flood of information in my mind. Archaeological knowledge, understanding of sacred sites, awareness of the spiritual significance of the ruins. Dr. River's lifetime of study transferred to me in seconds. I understand, I said. The shadow dog nodded. Good. Now go. Watch. Protect. When the sacred patterns are threatened, we will come. You will call us. The creature began to fade, becoming smoke and shadow again. And the other members of the pack did the same until I was alone in the canyon. But I wasn't really alone. I could feel them, watching from the spaces between worlds, and I could feel the weight of my new responsibility. I was no longer just a park ranger, I was something more, something guardian. I found my way back to the ruins as the sun came up. The pottery was still arranged in perfect circles, but now I could see the patterns differently. They weren't just decorative, they were markers, boundaries between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. My radio crackled to life. "Santos, you copy? Where the hell are you?" It was Chuck. I'd been gone all night. "I'm at the ruins," I said. "Found evidence of the missing hikers. Are they okay?" I thought about Jake and Amy, about Dr. River, about all the people who'd encountered the Shadow Pack. They're safe. But Chuck, we need to make this area completely off limits. No more archaeological permits, no more research teams. What? Maria, this is one of our most important sites. The university pays us good money for access. I know, but just get back here. We'll talk about it when you're not suffering from heat exhaustion. I looked at the pottery circles, at the bite marks in the stone walls. I'm not suffering from heat exhaustion. But I couldn't explain what had really happened. Who would believe me? Instead, I started walking back to my truck, thinking about how to protect this place without sounding completely crazy. That's when I saw the smoke. It was rising from a hill about a mile away. Black smoke, the kind that comes from burning plastic or chemical materials. Someone was camping illegally, probably burning trash. I hiked toward the smoke, planning to issue citations and confiscate whatever they were burning. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a campfire. It was an excavation site. A team of archaeologists had set up equipment on the hill. They'd been digging for hours, maybe days. The smoke was coming from a generator that was powering their equipment. And they were digging right through a burial site. I could see the pottery shards scattered everywhere, the careful patterns destroyed. Ancient bones were visible in the dirt, tossed aside like garbage. The team was so focused on their work that they hadn't noticed me approaching. "Hey!" I called out. "This is a restricted area." A woman in her 40s looked up from a measuring tape. "Oh, hi. You must be the ranger. I'm Dr. Patricia Vance from ASU. We have permits for this site." I checked my radio for messages. Sure enough, Chuck had approved a new dig while I was gone. He'd probably been trying to reach me all night. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to shut this down," I said. Dr. Vance frowned. "Shut it down? We just started. We've already found evidence of a major burial complex. This could be the find of the century." "That's why it needs to be protected," I said. "This is sacred ground." "Sacred to who? The tribal council signed off on this dig. We're following all the proper protocols." I looked at the scattered bones, the broken pottery, the destroyed patterns. The Shadow Pack was probably already aware of what was happening. They'd be coming soon. "You need to pack up your equipment and leave," I said. "Now." "I'm not leaving," Dr. Vance said. "We have legal permits. If you want us gone, you'll have to arrest us." I looked at her team. 5 people, all focused on their work. They had no idea what they were dealing with. "How long have you been digging?" I asked. "Since yesterday morning. We've been working in shifts to maximize our time." 24 hours. They'd been disturbing the burial site for a full day. That's when I felt it. The cold presence I'd learned to recognize. The Shadow Pack was coming. "Everyone needs to leave," I said, raising my voice. "Right now. This is an emergency evacuation." The team looked at me like I was crazy. Dr. Vance crossed her arms. "We're not going anywhere." The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. The wind picked up, swirling dust around the excavation site. The generator coughed and died. "What's wrong with the equipment?" someone asked. I could see them now, shadows moving between the rocks, yellow eyes gleaming in the morning sun. The Shadow Pack was manifesting, and they were angry. "Run," I said quietly. "Please, just run." The first howl echoed across the desert, then another, then a chorus of voices that sounded like screaming wind. The archaeological team finally looked up from their work. Dr. Vance's face went pale. "What is that?" "Justice," I said. The shadow dogs materialized out of the rocks. There were more of them than I'd ever seen before, Dozens of ghostly creatures, all focused on the people who'd been digging up their children's bones. The team ran for their vehicles, but the shadow pack was faster. They flowed across the desert like smoke, surrounding the archaeologists before they could escape. I could feel the pull of their hunger, the desperate need to restore balance. But I also felt something else, my connection to them, my role as guardian. "Stop," I said, stepping between the shadow pack and the fleeing humans. The lead creature, the same one I'd spoken to the night before, materialized in front of me. "They dig, they take, they scatter the bones." "I know," I said, "but they didn't know what they were doing. They were just trying to learn. Ignorance is not forgiveness." "No, but it's not the same as malice. Let me handle this." The shadow dog studied me with those impossible yellow eyes. "You are guardian. You allowed this." I was learning too. I didn't understand my responsibilities, but I do now. The creature was silent for a long moment. Around us, the rest of the pack waited, their hunger palpable. "What do you propose?" the leader Finnegat, Ally asked. "Let them go. I'll make sure they never come back. I'll make sure no one ever disturbs this site again." "And if they tell others? If more come?" I thought about that. "Then I'll handle it. Whatever it takes." The shadow dog moved closer. "You would give up your human life completely? Become fully spirit? Guardian forever?" I looked at the scattered bones, at the destroyed pottery patterns, at the terrified archaeologists. I thought about Dr. River, aging to death in seconds, about Jake and Amy, drained of years of their lives. "Yes," I said, "if that's what it takes to protect this place." The creature nodded slowly. "Then prove it. Restore the sacred patterns. Make the bones whole. Show us your commitment." I knelt in the sand and began gathering the scattered pottery shards. Some were broken, but most were just displaced. I could feel the right patterns in my mind, the knowledge Dr. River had passed to me. It took hours. The sun climbed higher, and the archaeological team waited in their vehicles, too afraid to leave, but too scared to come closer. I worked with my hands, placing each piece in its proper position, rebuilding the sacred circles that protected the burial site. When I was finished, the shadow pack gathered around me. I could feel their approval, their acceptance. "You are truly guardian now," the leader said. "Between worlds, neither fully living nor fully dead." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you watch, you protect, you keep the sacred patterns whole." The creature breathed on me one more time. This time the cold went deeper, changing something fundamental in my nature. I felt my connection to the human world fading, my ties to the spirit realm growing stronger. When it was over, I was still myself, but I was something more as well. The archaeological team left that day and never came back. Dr. Vance filed a report about unusual atmospheric conditions and equipment failures, but she never mentioned the shadow pack. Some experiences are too strange to put into words. I stayed on as a park ranger, but my duties changed. On paper, I was still Maria Santos, protecting visitors and maintaining trails. But in reality, I had become something else, a guardian standing between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Chuck noticed the change, of course. I stopped leading archaeological teams to sensitive sites. I started filing reports about unstable ground conditions and dangerous wildlife activity whenever someone wanted to dig near burial areas. I became very good at finding reasons to keep people away from places they shouldn't be. "You've gotten weird, Santos," he told me one day. "Ever since that night at the ruins." He was right. I had gotten weird. I could see things other people couldn't see, shadows that moved independently, patterns in the rocks that revealed the presence of ancient spirits, signs of spiritual activity that warned of trouble ahead. And I wasn't alone. The shadow pack was always there, just on the edge of perception. When hikers got too close to sensitive areas, the pack would herd them away. When developers tried to build near sacred sites, strange accidents would happen until they gave up and went elsewhere. I learned to work with them, to understand their needs and limitations. They were guardians too, spirits bound to protect their people's burial grounds. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted to be left alone. Most of the time it worked. The desert has a way of discouraging people who don't belong there. A broken axle here, an equipment failure there, a sudden storm that makes camping impossible, small inconveniences that add up to big deterrents. But sometimes people were persistent. Sometimes they had to be stopped more directly. 3 months after my encounter with the Shadow Pack, a treasure hunter named Gary Mills came to the park. He'd heard stories about Indian gold hidden in the ruins, and he was determined to find it. He had metal detectors, digging equipment, and a complete disregard for park regulations. I tried to stop him through official channels. I issued citations, confiscated his equipment, and had him arrested twice. But he kept coming back, always finding new ways to sneak into restricted areas. The Shadow Pack was getting restless. I could feel their hunger growing stronger each time Mills violated the sacred sites. They wanted to feed, to restore balance in their traditional way. But I had made a promise to protect both the living and the dead. The final confrontation came on a cold December night. Mills had broken into the ruins again, this time with explosives. He was planning to blast through the stone walls to reach what he thought was a hidden chamber. I found him setting charges around the central fire pit, right in the middle of the sacred pottery circles. "Stop," I said, stepping out of the shadows. "You're going to destroy everything." Mills looked up, his face illuminated by the headlamp he was wearing. "Santos, what are you doing here?" "My job," I said. "Protecting this place." "From what? A bunch of old pots and rocks? There's real treasure here, Santos. Gold, silver, maybe precious stones. We could split it 50-50. I could feel the Shadow Pack gathering, their anger building. Mills couldn't see them, but I could. They were everywhere surrounding us, waiting for my signal. "There's no treasure," I said. "Just the bones of children who died 1,000 years ago. Children who deserve to rest in peace." Mills laughed. "You've been out in the desert too long, Santos. You're starting to believe the ghost stories." He turned back to his work, adjusting the timer on his explosives. 5 minutes should be enough to clear out of here. When this baby goes off, we'll have access to the whole complex. I can't let you do this. You can't stop me. I'm not breaking any federal laws. This is just archaeological investigation." I looked at the pottery circles, at the sacred patterns that had taken me hours to restore. I thought about the shadow pole, about their hunger and their need for balance. "You're right," I said. "I can't stop you." Mills smiled. "Smart girl. Now help me carry this equipment back to—" The howling started then, low and mournful at first, then building to a crescendo that seemed to come from the earth itself. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder and more complex, until it sounded like 100 voices screaming in harmony. Mills spun around, his eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" "Justice," I said. The Shadow Pack materialized out of the darkness. They were more solid than I'd ever seen them, their forms clearly defined against the star-filled sky. Yellow eyes gleamed like lanterns, and their breath was visible in the cold air. Mills stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the gun he kept in his belt. "Jesus Christ, what are those things?" "Guardians," I said. "They protect this place." The largest shadow dog stepped forward, its massive form blocking Mills's path to the explosives. When it spoke, its voice was like winter wind. "You disturb the sacred." Mill's gun was shaking in his hand. "Santos, call them off. Whatever they are, call them off." "I can't," I said. "They make their own choices." The shadow dog moved closer to Mills. "You bring fire. You bring destruction." "I'm leaving," Mills shouted. "I'm leaving right now." "Too late," the creature said. "The sacred patterns must be protected." It breathed on Mills, and the treasure hunter began to age rapidly. His hair turned gray, then white. His skin wrinkled and spotted. His hands became gnarled and shaky. "Please," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." The shadow dog paused, looking at me. "Guardian, what is your will?" I looked at Mills, now aged 30 years in as many seconds. I thought about all the people who'd tried to exploit this place, all the sacred sites that had been destroyed by greed and ignorance. "Let him live," I said, "but make sure he remembers." The creature nodded. "He will remember, and he will tell others. The sacred places are protected." Mills collapsed to his knees, gasping. He looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. What are you?" "A guardian," I said. "Like them." The shadow pack began to fade as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. But before they disappeared completely, the leader spoke one more time. "Well done, Guardian. The sacred patterns are safe." I helped Mills gather his equipment and stumble back to his truck. He left that morning and never returned. But word got out, as it always does. Stories spread about the ghost dogs that guarded the ruins, about the ranger who worked with spirits, about the treasure hunter who aged 30 years in one night. Most people dismissed the stories as desert mythology, but some believed, and those who believed stayed away. That was 5 years ago. I'm still a ranger at Grand Canyon National Park, still protecting the desert and the people who visit it. But I'm also something more. A bridge between worlds, a guardian of sacred places, a keeper of ancient truths. The shadow pack is always with me, watching from the spaces between light and shadow. They don't need to manifest often anymore. The stories do most of the work, keeping the curious and the greedy away from places they shouldn't be. And I've learned to live with the change in myself. I'm not entirely human anymore, but I'm not entirely spirit either. I exist in the space between, protecting both worlds from each other. Sometimes, late at night when the desert is quiet and the stars are bright, I can hear them howling in the distance. Not hunting calls, but songs of contentment. The sacred patterns are safe. The children's bones rest undisturbed. Balance has been restored, and I keep watch, as I always will, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The shadow pack taught me that some places are too sacred to be studied, too important to be excavated, and too dangerous to be disturbed. They taught me that the dead have rights too, and that sometimes the living need to be protected from their own curiosity. I still get reports of strange sightings in the desert. Hikers who see dogs made of smoke. Campers who hear howling that sounds almost human. Archaeologists who find their equipment mysteriously broken after setting up near burial sites. I investigate every report, of course. It's my job. But I also know what I'm really looking for. Signs that the balance is holding, that the sacred patterns remain intact, that the guardians are still doing their work. Because the shadow pack isn't gone. They're never gone. They're just waiting, watching from the spaces between worlds, ready to protect what needs protecting. And I'll be there with them, for as long as the desert needs a guardian who can walk between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Some people think the desert is empty, lifeless. They're wrong. It's full of spirits, full of watchers, full of guardians who never sleep. And if you ever find yourself in the desert at night, if you hear howling that doesn't sound quite right, if you see shadows that move when they shouldn't, remember this story. Remember that some places are sacred, some boundaries shouldn't be crossed, and some guardians never rest. The shadow pack is still out there, keeping watch, and so am I. My name is David Sandstone, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. People think it's a peaceful job, but they're wrong. The desert will kill you if you're not careful. I learned that lesson the hard way. It was June 1988, and the heat was already brutal. I was working at Joshua Tree National Park in California, where the Mojave Desert stretches out like a brown ocean. The Joshua trees stand like twisted giants, their spiny arms reaching toward the sky. During the day, temperatures hit 120 degrees. At night, it could drop to freezing. The desert doesn't care if you live or die. I chose this job because I needed to be alone. 5 years ago, I was in the Army. My unit got lost in a desert training exercise. I was the only one who made it out. The others died from heat stroke, dehydration, and panic. I still hear their voices sometimes, especially when the wind blows through the Joshua trees. That morning, I got a call on my radio. 2 rock climbers had been found dead near Hidden Valley. The hikers who found them were shaken up bad. They kept saying the bodies were in impossible places, like they'd been thrown up onto the rock faces. I drove out to the site with my partner, Lisa Cactus. She was a paramedic who worked with the Park Service. Lisa was tough and practical. She didn't believe in ghost stories or legends. If someone died in the desert, there was always a logical reason. Probably heat stroke, she said as we bounced along the dirt road. People come out here thinking they're tough. The desert shows them different. When we reached the climbing area, I saw what the hikers meant. The first body was wedged into a crack in the rock wall, about 20 feet up. The second one was on a narrow ledge that even experienced climbers would struggle to reach. Both bodies were dried out like jerky, their skin brown and leathery. "How did they get up there?" Lisa asked, Ed shading her eyes with her hand. Jake Boulder was the climber who'd volunteered to help us get the bodies down. He was a local guy who knew every route in the park. He shook his head as he studied the rock face. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Look at their gear. They weren't wearing climbing harnesses. No ropes, no protection. You can't just walk up that wall." I examined the bodies after Jake lowered them down. They were mummified, but not in the normal way. Usually, the desert slowly dries out a corpse over weeks or months. These guys looked like they'd been cooked from the inside out. Their faces were twisted in pain, mouths open like they'd been screaming. "Heat stroke can cause hallucinations," Lisa said, but her voice wasn't as confident as usual. Maybe they climbed up there in a panic, not knowing what they were doing. The thermometer on my belt read 118 degrees, and it was only 10 in the morning. By afternoon, it would be deadly. I looked up at the Joshua trees swaying in the hot wind. For a moment, I thought I saw something moving between them, a tall, dark shape that walked upright like a person. But when I blinked, it was gone. Jake was studying the rock face where we'd found the bodies. "My grandfather used to tell stories about this place," he said quietly. "The Chemehuevi people called it the home of the heat walker. They said it hunts during the hottest days of summer." "That's just superstition," Lisa said, but she was looking around nervously. I wasn't so sure. In the army, I'd learned that old stories usually have some truth in them. The desert had been here for millions of years. Humans had only been walking through it for a few thousand. We weren't the first to die out here, and we wouldn't be the last. As we loaded the bodies into the truck, I noticed something strange. The rocks around where we'd found them were darker than the rest. It was like they'd been burned by intense heat. When I touched one, it was so hot I jerked my hand back. "That's weird," Jake said. "These rocks should be cooler in the shade." The sun was climbing higher, and the heat was getting worse. We needed to get back to the ranger station before the real killer heat hit. But as we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. The Joshua trees seemed to be watching us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those bodies and the way they'd been cooked. I'd seen heat stroke victims before, but never anything like this. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness outside my trailer. The next morning, I got another call. 2 more climbers were missing. The missing climbers were a young couple from Los Angeles. They'd been rock climbing near Skull Rock, about 5 miles from where we'd found the first bodies. Their car was still in the parking area, but there was no sign of them. Lisa and I drove out with Jake to start the search. The temperature was already over 115 degrees at 9 in the morning. The metal on our truck was too hot to touch with bare hands. "We need to find them fast," Lisa said, checking her medical kit. "Nobody can survive long in this heat without water and shade." We split up to cover more ground. I took the north side of Skull Rock, following a trail that led deeper into the desert. The Joshua trees grew thicker here, creating a maze of spiny trunks and twisted branches. The air shimmered with heat waves that made everything look like it was underwater. I'd been walking for about an hour when I found the first sign of trouble. A backpack was hanging from a Joshua tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. It was the expensive kind that serious climbers use. Inside, I found water bottles, energy bars, and a camera. The camera was still working. I scrolled through the photos on the digital display. The couple looked happy in the early shots, posing next to rock formations and Joshua trees. But the later photos were different. They showed the same locations, but something was wrong with the shadows. In one photo, there was a dark shape standing between two Joshua trees. It looked like a person, but it was too tall and thin. Its arms were too long, and its fingers ended in what looked like claws. The shape seemed to be made of heat and shadow, wavering like a mirage. I called Lisa on my radio. "I found their gear," I said. "But there's something strange about these photos." "What do you mean, strange?" Before I could answer, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a scream, high and desperate, coming from somewhere deeper in the desert. But it sounded wrong, like it was being echoed through a tunnel. "Did you hear that?" I asked into the radio. "Hear what?" "David, you're breaking up. The heat must be affecting the radio." I followed the sound, pushing through the thick Joshua trees. The temperature seemed to be getting hotter with every step. My thermometer read 125 degrees, which was impossible. Even Death Valley rarely got that hot. I found the second climber about a quarter-mile away. She was sitting under a Joshua tree, her back against the trunk. At first I thought she was resting in the shade. Then I got closer and saw her face. She was dead, but like the others, she'd been mummified. Her skin was brown and tight, her lips pulled back from her teeth. Her eyes were wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. But the worst part was that she was still sitting upright, like she'd died instantly. I checked for a pulse, knowing I wouldn't find one. Her body was completely dried out, but she was still warm. Too warm. It was like she'd been cooked from the inside. "Lisa, I found one of them," I said into the radio. "She's dead. Heat stroke, but different." "How different?" I looked around for the male climber but couldn't see him anywhere. That's when I noticed the tracks in the sand. They were human footprints, but they were huge. At least size 15, maybe bigger. And they were deep, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy. The tracks led away from the body, toward a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter. I followed them, feeling the heat press down on me like a weight. My water bottle was already half empty, and sweat was pouring off me. The rocks created a small cave, maybe 10 feet deep. It was cooler inside, but not by much. That's where I found the male climber. He was stuck to the back wall of the cave, his arms and legs spread wide like he'd been thrown against it. His body was mummified like the others, but his position was impossible. The wall was smooth rock. There was nothing to grab onto, no way to climb up there. I approached carefully, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. Up close, I could see claw marks in the rock around his body. They were deep gouges, like something with incredible strength had scraped its fingers across solid stone. That's when I heard the breathing. It was slow and deep, like a bellows pumping air. But it wasn't coming from the cave entrance behind me. It was coming from deeper in the rock, from cracks and crevices I couldn't see. I backed toward the entrance, my heart pounding. The breathing got louder, and I could feel hot air moving against my face. It smelled like sulfur and burnt meat. Just as I reached the cave mouth, I saw it. A shadow moved across the entrance, blocking out the sunlight. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with arms that hung down to its knees. For just a moment, I saw its face. It looked human, but stretched and twisted by incredible heat. Its eyes were black pits, and its mouth was full of yellowed teeth. Then it was gone, and I was alone in the cave with the dead climber. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran as fast as I could through the Joshua trees, back toward the truck. The heat seemed to follow me, pressing against my back like a physical thing. I could hear that breathing behind me, slow and patient. When I reached the truck, Lisa and Jay, Ake, were waiting. They took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Lisa asked. I told them about the cave and the bodies. I didn't mention the shadow or the breathing. Not yet. I wasn't ready to admit what I'd seen. "We need to get those bodies out of there," Lisa said, "before the heat gets worse." But when we went back to the cave, the male climber's body was gone. The claw marks were still there, but the wall was empty, and the breathing had stopped. Jake was studying the tracks in the sand. "These aren't human," he said quietly. My grandfather was right. The heat walker is real. We called for backup, but the nearest sheriff's deputy was 3 hours away. By the time help arrived, the temperature would be over 130 degrees. Nobody could work in that kind of heat. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, but her voice was shaking. She'd seen the claw marks in the rock. Even she couldn't explain them away. Jake was following the giant footprints. They led deeper into the desert, toward a part of the park that most visitors never saw. The Joshua trees grew thicker there, and the rocks formed maze-like passages between tall stone walls. "It's taking them to its territory," Jake said. "The Kemohuevi stories say the heat walker lives in the deep desert, where the sun burns hottest." I made a decision that probably saved our lives, at least for a while. "We're going after it," I said. "There might be more victims out there." Lisa stared at me. "David, that's crazy. We don't even know what we're dealing with." "I know what I saw," I said. "And I know that thing killed those climbers. If we don't stop it, it'll kill more." We loaded up with extra water and headed deeper into the desert. The heat was getting worse by the minute. The metal on our equipment was too hot to touch. Even the Joshua trees looked like they were wilting. Jake led us through. Ugh! The rock passages, following the tracks. The walls on either side of us were smooth and tall, like a natural corridor. But as we walked, I noticed something wrong. The rocks were getting darker, like they'd been burned. "The temperature's rising," Lisa said, checking her thermometer. "It's 135 degrees. That's not possible." She was right. Even in Death Valley, the highest temperature ever recorded was 134 degrees. But our thermometers didn't lie. The heat was getting worse with every step. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from ahead of us, echoing off the rock walls. It was a man's voice, full of pain and terror, but it cut off suddenly like someone had flipped a switch. We ran toward the sound, our boots slipping on the sand. The passage opened into a circular area surrounded by tall rocks. In the center was a natural depression, like a bowl carved into the stone. 3 bodies lay in the depression. They were mummified like the others, but these were fresh. The process had happened fast, maybe in the last few hours. Their clothes were still intact, but their skin was brown and leathery. "Jesus," Lisa whispered. "How many people has this thing killed?" Jake was studying the rock walls around the depression. "Look at this," he said, pointing to marks in the stone. "These walls are covered in claw marks. It's been using this place for a long time." I examined the bodies more closely. They weren't just random victims. 2 of them were wearing Park Service uniforms. They were rangers, like me. The 3rd body was wearing civilian clothes, but he had a radio clipped to his belt. "These are the missing rangers from last month," I said. "Everyone thought they got lost in a flash flood." Lisa checked her radio, but it was dead. The heat had fried the electronics. We were on our own. That's when the breathing started again. It was coming from all around us, echoing off the rock walls. Slow, deep breaths that sounded like a giant bellows. The temperature in the depression started rising even higher. "We need to get out of here," Lisa said, but her voice was weak. The heat was getting to her. Jake was already moving toward the passage we'd come from, but when we reached it, the way was blocked. A wall of heat shimmered in the air, like an invisible barrier. When Jake tried to push through it, he screamed and jerked his hand back. His palm was bright red, like he'd touched a hot stove. "It's trapping us," he said. "The heat walker doesn't want us to leave." The breathing got louder, and I could feel hot air moving against my face. It was coming from the cracks in the rock walls, from places we couldn't see. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It stepped out of the rock wall like it was made of shadow and heat. 8 feet tall, with arms that hung to its knees. Its skin was black and cracked like burned leather. Its face was almost human, but stretched and twisted by incredible heat. Its eyes were empty black holes, and its mouth was full of yellow teeth. But the worst part was that it moved like liquid fire. Every step it took left burning footprints in the sand. The air around it shimmered with heat waves. "The heat walker," Jake whispered. "It's real." The creature looked at us with those empty eyes. Then it opened its mouth and breathed out a stream of superheated air. The temperature in the depression jumped to over 140 degrees. Lisa collapsed. The heat was too much for her. She was going into heat stroke, her body shutting down to protect itself. Jake tried to help her, but when he touched her skin, he pulled his hand back. She was burning up from the inside. The heat walker moved closer, studying us like we were insects. It reached out with one long arm and touched the rock wall. Where its fingers made contact, the stone glowed red hot. I understood then what it was doing. This creature didn't just live in the heat. It controlled it. It could make the temperature rise or fall at will. It was cooking us alive, slowly, enjoying our suffering. Jake tried to run, but the heat wall was still blocking the passage. He collapsed next to Lisa, his body overcome by the impossible temperature. I was alone with the creature, and I could feel my own body starting to shut down. My vision was blurring and my legs felt weak. The heat was draining the life out of me. But then I remembered something from my military training. We'd learned about surviving in extreme heat. The key was to stay calm, conserve energy, and find shade. But there was no shade here, and the creature controlled the temperature. I had one chance. In my emergency kit, I carried a small canister of liquid nitrogen. It was for treating severe burns, but I'd never used it. If I could get close enough to the creature, maybe I could disrupt its heat control. The heat walker was enjoying my suffering. It moved closer, breathing that superheated air in my face. I could feel my skin starting to blister. I waited until it was within arm's reach. Then I pulled the pin on the liquid nitrogen canister and sprayed it directly at the creature's face. The effect was immediate. The creature screamed, a sound like metal being twisted. The temperature in the depression dropped suddenly, and the heat walls disappeared. But I'd only hurt it, not killed it. The heat walker stumbled backward, its black skin smoking where the liquid nitrogen had hit it. Its empty eyes fixed on me with pure hatred. I grabbed Lisa and Jake, dragging them toward the passage. The creature was recovering fast, and I could feel the temperature starting to rise again. We made it to the rock corridor, just as the heat walker let out another scream. This time the sound was filled with rage. It was coming after us, and it was angry. I dragged Lisa and Jake through the rock passage as fast as I could. Behind us I could hear the heat walker moving. Its footsteps sounded like molten metal hitting stone. The temperature was rising again, chasing us through the narrow corridor. Jake was barely conscious, but he managed to point out a side passage. "That way," he gasped, "leads to the old mine shaft." I'd heard about the abandoned mine. It was from the 1920s, when prospectors thought they could find gold in the desert. The shaft went deep into the rock, where it would be cooler. Maybe we could hide there until help came. The mine entrance was hidden behind a wall of Joshua trees. I had to carry Lisa the last 100 yards. She was burning up with fever, her skin hot and dry. Jake stumbled along behind us, barely able to walk. The mine shaft was dark and cool. After the killing heat outside, it felt like air conditioning. I laid Lisa down on the rocky floor and checked her pulse. It was fast and weak, but she was alive. "Water," she whispered. "Need water." I gave her small sips from my canteen. Jake collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His face was bright red from heat exposure. "Is it following us?" he asked. I looked back at the mine entrance. The Joshua trees outside were swaying in the hot wind, but I couldn't see the creature. Maybe the liquid nitrogen had hurt it more than I thought. "Tell me about the heat walker," I said to Jake. "What did your grandfather say about it?" Jake closed his eyes, trying to remember. He said it was old, older than the desert itself. It feeds on heat and pain. During the hottest days of summer, it hunts. It can control temperature, make the air so hot it kills. "How do you stop it?" "You don't," Jake said. "You survive it. Wait for winter when it sleeps." But my grandfather said there was one way to hurt it. Extreme cold. It can't handle sudden temperature changes. I thought about the liquid nitrogen canister. I'd used most of it already, but there might be enough left for one more shot. If I could get close enough to the creature again. That's when I heard the breathing. It was coming from deep in the mine shaft, from the darkness behind us. Slow, Deep breaths that echoed off the walls. The creature hadn't followed us through the entrance. It had found another way in. The temperature in the mine started rising. The cool air that had felt so good was becoming hot and stifling. I could see heat waves starting to shimmer in the darkness. "It's in here with us," I said. Lisa tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Jake was looking around frantically, searching for another way out, but the mine shaft was a dead end. We were trapped. Red light started glowing from the depths of the mine. The creature was coming, its body so hot it was lighting up the darkness. I could see its silhouette moving through the shadows, tall and twisted. I had to make a choice. I could try to fight it with the remaining liquid nitrogen, or I could try to get Lisa and Jake to safety. But there was nowhere to run. The heat walker stepped into the light at the mine entrance. In the confined space, it looked even more terrifying. Its black skin was cracked and glowing like lava cooling on the surface, its empty eyes fixed on me. "Why?" I asked it. "Why are you doing this?" The creature tilted its head like it was considering the question. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. Its voice was like the sound of fire consuming wood. "Hot," it said. "So hot. Been cold for so long. Need the heat. Need the pain." I understood then. This thing wasn't just a predator. It was starving. The desert heat wasn't enough anymore. It needed the heat that comes from life itself, from the fear and pain of dying creatures. "The people you killed," I said. "You're stealing their body heat." The creature nodded slowly. "Warm. So warm. But not enough. Never enough." It was getting closer, and the temperature in the mine was becoming unbearable. I could feel my skin starting to blister again. Lisa was unconscious, and Jake was barely hanging on. I had one last chance. I pulled out the liquid nitrogen canister and checked the gauge. Almost empty, but maybe enough for one final shot. "You want heat?" I said to the creature. "Come and get it." The heat walk moved toward me, its arms outstretched. I could see the hunger in its empty eyes. It wanted to touch me, to steal my life heat like it had stolen from all the others. I waited until it was close enough to grab me. Then I aimed the canister at its face and released the last of the liquid nitrogen. The creature screamed and stumbled backward. Where the supercooled gas hit its skin, cracks appeared. Black liquid poured out, steaming in the hot air. But this time I didn't stop there. I tackled the creature, pushing it deeper into the mine shaft. My hands burned where they touched its skin, but I held on. I drove it back toward the deepest part of the mine, where the rock walls were thick and cold. The heat walker was weakening. The sudden temperature change was disrupting its control. The mine started cooling down, and I could breathe again. We hit the back wall of the mine together. The impact sent rocks tumbling from the ceiling. The creature was trying to get away, but I held on, using my body weight to pin it against the cold stone. "You're not going to hurt anyone else," I said. The heat walker looked at me with those empty eyes. For a moment, I saw something that might have been fear. Then it spoke one last time. "Cold," it whispered. "So cold." The rock wall behind us cracked. The creature's body was cooling rapidly, shrinking in on itself. The black skin was hardening, becoming brittle. Cracks spread across its face and arms. Then it shattered like glass. The pieces fell to the mine floor, still steaming. I backed away, my hands burned, but alive. The temperature in the mine was normal again, cool and comfortable. I helped Lisa and Jake to their feet. We stumbled out of the mine together into the blazing heat of the desert. But after what we'd been through, even 120 degrees felt cool. The rescue team found us 3 hours later. We were dehydrated and burned, but alive. Lisa had severe heat stroke, but she recovered after 2 days in the hospital. Jake had second-degree burns on his hands, but he was tough. He'd heal. The official report said, we'd been victims of extreme heat exposure. The bodies we'd found were attributed to hikers who'd gotten lost and died from heat stroke. The sheriff's department didn't want to hear about giant footprints or creatures that controlled temperature. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I was back on duty. The department had moved me to a desk job, handling permits and visitor information. They said I needed time to recover from the trauma, but I knew they were worried about my story. Lisa came to see me on her first day back. She looked tired, but determined. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said. "About that thing in the mine." "The heat walker? Is that what Jake called it?" She sat down across from my desk. "I don't understand what we saw, but I know it was real, and I know it's not the only one." She was right. Over the next few months, we heard reports from other parks. Rangers finding mummified bodies in impossible locations. Hikers disappearing during heat waves, always during the hottest days of summer. I started keeping a file. Unofficial reports, strange stories, anything that might be related. The pattern was clear. These creatures were active all across the American Southwest, from California to Texas. They hunted during extreme heat, and they were getting bolder. Jake became my unofficial partner in tracking them. His grandfather's stories contained clues about their behavior and weaknesses. We learned that they were most active during heat waves, when temperatures climbed above 115 degrees. They avoided areas with air conditioning or artificial cooling, and they were vulnerable to sudden temperature changes. I developed new protocols for park rangers working in extreme heat. Always carry liquid nitrogen canisters, never work alone during heat waves, and never ignore the old stories told by Native American tribe. As they knew about these creatures long before modern science tried to explain them away. The heat walker I'd killed in the mine was just one of many. Every summer, more rangers report strange deaths and impossible heat readings. The creatures are adapting, learning to avoid the cold weapons we use against them. But we're learning too. I've trained dozens of rangers in heat walker protocols. We've saved lives, stopped attacks, and driven the creatures back to the deep desert where they belong. The desert is still dangerous. It always has been, and it always will be. But now we know about one more threat hiding in the heat and shadows, and we're ready for it. Last summer, a family of tourists disappeared near Skull Rock. Their car was found in the parking area, but there was no sign of them. The official report blamed flash floods, but I knew better. I went out to investigate alone, carrying my equipment and emergency coolant. The temperature was 118 degrees, perfect hunting weather for a heat walker. I found the family's bodies in the same depression where we'd discovered the rangers. 3 more victims, mummified by impossible heat. But this time, I was ready. The heat walker came for me just as the sun reached its peak. 8 feet tall, with arms that hung to its knees, its empty eyes fixed on me with hunger. But I wasn't the same terrified ranger it had faced in the mine. I was prepared. I had better equipment, more experience. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. Jake was waiting in the rocks above with a high-powered cooling system. Lisa was monitoring my vital signs from the ranger station. And I had a new weapon. A modified fire extinguisher that could drop the temperature in a small area by 50 degrees in seconds. The heat walker never had a chance. As I watched its body shatter against the cold rock, I thought about all the people it had killed, the climbers, the rangers, the tourists. They deserved justice and they got it. But there are more heat walkers out there. Every summer they claim new victims. Every heat wave brings fresh reports of impossible deaths and mummified bodies. The desert is vast and it keeps its secrets well. But some of us know the truth. Some of us are watching, waiting, and ready to fight. My name is David Sandstone, and I'm a park ranger. People think it's a peaceful job, but they're wrong. The desert will kill you if you're not careful. And sometimes, the desert itself is hunting you. My name is Marcus Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I've rescued lost hikers, tracked down missing campers, and pulled bodies from frozen rivers. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong. It was October 1983 when everything changed. I was stationed at Cold Creek Wilderness Station, 40 miles from the nearest town. The place was just a stone cabin built back in 1934 with a radio tower and emergency supplies. When winter storms hit, I'd be completely cut off from the outside world. I liked it that way. After my wife Maria died 3 years ago, I needed the quiet. My twin daughters, Jessica and Amanda, lived with my mother in Seattle during school. They were 16 now, old enough to understand why their dad needed to work alone in the woods. At least that's what I told myself. The truth was, I'd been drinking too much since the accident. Every night I'd sit in that cabin with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the fire and trying to forget. The isolation made it easy to drink without anyone judging me. It also made it easy to doubt what I saw when things got strange. Cold Creek Valley was different from other places I'd worked. The Quinault tribe had always said it was sacred land, a burial ground for their chiefs. White settlers avoided the area, calling it bad medicine. Even the Park Service had debated whether to build the station there, but they did it anyway, ignoring the tribal warnings. I'd noticed things over the years, the way animals stayed away from certain parts of the valley, how the trees grew in weird spiral patterns near the old rock carvings, the way my radio would fill with static at exactly the same time every night. But I had explanations for all of it. I was a man of science, not superstition. The valley sat at 3,200 feet, surrounded by peaks that reached 6,000 feet. Ancient glaciers had carved out the granite cliffs, and old Douglas fir trees covered the mountainsides. It was beautiful, but there was something else too, something that made you feel watched. I'd been working there for 3 years when the Henderson family went missing. They were from Seattle. Robert, Patricia, and their 2 kids, Tommy and Sarah. Experienced hikers with all the right equipment. They'd registered for a weekend camping trip and should have been back by Sunday evening. When Monday morning came with no sign of them, I started the search. Standard procedure. GPS coordinates, trail markers, systematic grid search. I'd never lost a missing person case in my career. I wasn't about to start now. The first snow of the season had fallen overnight, about 18 inches. The temperature dropped to 10 below zero, and the wind howled through the valley like something angry. But I'd worked in worse conditions. I packed my gear, checked my radio, and headed out. I found their campsite 3 miles up the main trail. That's when I knew something was very wrong. The Hendersons' camp looked like a tornado had hit it. Their tent was shredded, but not torn. Cut. Clean slices through the fabric like someone had used a knife. But the sleeping bags were folded neatly in a pile. The food was scattered around the site, but nothing had been eaten. No bear scat, no claw marks on the trees. I called it in on my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Thornfield. I found the Henderson campsite, requesting backup." The radio crackled with static. For 30 seconds, nothing but white noise. Then my dispatcher's voice came through. "Marcus, say again. We're getting interference." I tried again, but got the same result. 30 seconds of static, then a brief clear signal. It happened every time I tried to use the radio near the campsite. I pulled out my compass to check my bearings. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My GPS showed impossible readings, coordinates that would put me in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's when I found the footprints. They were huge, 18 inches long, clearly made by something walking on 2 legs. 5 toes, no claw marks. The stride pattern suggested whatever made them was at least 10 feet tall. The prints led away from the destroyed campsite, heading toward the restricted area where the sacred rock carvings were. I followed them for about a mile. The forest got quieter with each step. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering, no wind in the trees. Even my own footsteps seemed muffled. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees, and I could see my breath in thick clouds. There was a smell, too, musky, like a wet dog mixed with rotting leaves. It got stronger as I followed the trail. The prints led to a clearing where 7 ancient petroglyphs were carved into the cliff face, tall figures with glowing eyes according to tribal stories. The Quinault said these marked the boundary of sacred land. No one was supposed to go beyond them. That's where I found Robert Henderson. He was leaning against one of the sacred trees, his arms at his sides, facing the rock carvings. At first glance, he looked like he was resting, but his chest was crushed, ribs clearly broken. He'd died instantly. No defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. The weird part was his condition. Despite the freezing temperature, there was no ice on his body, no frost in his hair. He looked like he'd just died, not like he'd been there for days. And someone had placed coins on his eyes, an old Native American tradition. I called for backup again. This time, Ranger Tommy Vasquez answered. He was half Quinault, an experienced tracker who knew the old stories. When I described what I'd found, he went quiet for a long time. "Marcus," he said finally, "don't go any further into that area. I'm coming out." "Tommy, I need to find the rest of the family. Just stay where you are, please." But I couldn't wait. It was getting dark, and if Patricia and the kids were still alive, they needed help. I followed the trail beyond the petroglyphs into the sacred area. The footprints led up a narrow canyon between two granite walls. The smell got stronger, and the silence became complete. Not even the wind made a sound. It felt like walking into a tomb. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved between the trees ahead of me. Too tall to be human, too wide to be a bear. It stopped and turned toward me, and I saw two amber eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. They were intelligent eyes, ancient and knowing. The creature was at least 12 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its chest was barrel-shaped, arms hanging down past its knees. The face was somewhere between human and ape, but the eyes were definitely human. They studied me with the kind of intelligence that made my skin crawl. We stared at each other for what felt like hours. Then images flooded my mind. Not thoughts, but actual pictures, like watching a movie. I saw the Henderson family arriving at the valley. I saw Robert carving his initials into one of the sacred trees. I saw Patricia throwing trash into the creek. I saw the children using the bathroom near the petroglyphs. Each violation made the creature angrier. Each disrespectful act sealed their fate. The images stopped, and the creature stepped back into the shadows. When I shined my light where it had been standing, there was nothing there. I ran back to the ranger station, my heart pounding. The whiskey was calling to me, but I needed to stay sharp. Tommy would be here soon, and I had to decide what to tell him. How do you explain that you've seen something that shouldn't exist? Tommy arrived at sunrise, his helicopter landing in the clearing behind the station. He was a quiet man, about my age, with black hair and weathered hands. His grandmother had been a Tribune, all medicine woman, and he'd grown up hearing the old stories. "Show me," he said, loading his pack with tracking equipment. We hiked back to the Henderson campsite. Tommy examined the shredded tent, the folded sleeping bags, the scattered food. He found the footprints and followed them without saying a word, but I could see the recognition in his eyes. "This is what I was afraid of," he said when we reached the petroglyphs. "My grandmother called it the Guardian. She said it watches over the sacred places." "Tommy, you're starting to sound like..." "Like what?" "Like an Indian telling ghost stories." His voice was sharp. "Look around, Marcus. Look at what you found. Can you explain this with your science?" I couldn't. The body, the footprints, the equipment malfunctions, none of it made sense. But accepting the alternative meant accepting that everything I believed was wrong. We found Patricia and the children that afternoon. They were in a cave about 2 miles from the petroglyphs, huddled together in the dark. Patricia was conscious, but wouldn't speak. The kids were in shock, staring at nothing with wide eyes. All three were unharmed, but clearly traumatized. "What happened?" I asked Patricia. "Where have you been?" She looked at me like she was seeing through me. "I don't remember," she whispered. After we found Robert, everything went black." Tommy called for medical evacuation while I tried to get more information, but it was like their memories had been wiped clean. They remembered setting up camp, Robert going to look for firewood, then nothing until we found them. As the rescue helicopter lifted off with the family, I felt eyes watching me from the forest. The Guardian was still there, still judging, still waiting. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. The wind in the trees, the settling of the cabin walls, the hoot of an owl. Around midnight, I heard something else. Footsteps circling the cabin. I grabbed my grandfather's .30-06 rifle and looked out the window. The snow around the cabin was crisscrossed with those massive footprints. Whatever was out there had been walking around the building for hours. The footsteps stopped at the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks echoed through the cabin, then silence. I stood there for an hour, rifle in hand, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the footprints led away into the forest. But there was something else. Carved into the door, with deep, precise cuts, was a symbol I'd seen on the petroglyphs. A warning, or maybe a message. The next morning, I found more signs. Trees marked with claw marks 12 feet off the ground. Rocks arranged in patterns that definitely weren't natural. And everywhere, that musky smell that made my stomach turn. I called the Park Service and reported Robert Henderson's death as a bear attack. It was the only explanation that would make sense to them. The sacred area was quietly made off limits, and new trail markers were installed to direct hikers away from the petroglyphs. But I knew the truth. And I knew the Guardian wasn't finished with me. It came to me in dreams first. Visions of other people who had violated the sacred places over the years. Some had been allowed to leave with warnings. Others, like Robert, had paid a higher price. I began to understand that the Guardian wasn't just a mindless monster. It was a protector, following rules that were older than our civilization. It judged people based on their respect for the land, their intentions, their hearts. And it was testing me. Every night, I'd find new signs around the cabin. Footprints in impossible places, on the roof, up the sides of trees, across the surface of the frozen creek. The Guardian was showing me its power, its ability to move in ways that defied physics. But it was also showing me something else. Pictures in my mind of other rangers in other parks, men and women, who had made the same choice I was being asked to make. They had become guardians of the guardians, protectors of the sacred places. The question was, would I accept the job? 3 weeks after the Henderson incident, I made my decision. I couldn't keep living in fear, jumping at every sound, drinking myself to sleep every night. I needed answers, and I needed to face whatever was haunting Cold Creek Valley. I hiked back to the petroglyphs at sunset, carrying only my rifle and a flashlight. The forest was dead quiet, like it was holding its breath. Even my footsteps seemed too loud. The Guardian was waiting for me. It stood in the clearing in front of the rock carvings, twice as tall as a man, its amber eyes glowing in the dim light. This time it didn't hide in the shadows. It wanted me to see it clearly. "I know what you are," I said, my voice shaking. "I know why you killed Robert Henderson." The creature tilted its massive head, studying me. Then the images came flooding back, but this time they were different. I saw the valley as it had been centuries ago, when the Quinault people came here to bury their chiefs. I saw the first white settlers, most of them respectful, some of them not. I saw the Park Service building the ranger station despite tribal warnings, and I saw myself, the drunk widower who'd been stumbling through the forest for 3 years, too caught up in his own grief to understand what he was protecting. The Guardian stepped closer, and I felt its presence in my mind. Not violent or threatening, more like a teacher trying to explain something important to a slow student. "You could have been like him," it seemed to say, showing me Robert Henderson's final moments. Careless, disrespectful, taking what doesn't belong to you. "But I wasn't," I said. "No, you watch, you learn, you could serve." The images changed. I saw other rangers in other parks, men and women who had encountered their own guardians. They had made a choice to protect the sacred places, to keep the old agreements alive. In return, they received knowledge, protect, ion, and purpose. But there was a price. I saw that too. The isolation, the responsibility, the weight of secrets that could never be shared. These rangers lived between two worlds, serving as bridges between the human and the spiritual. "What about my daughters?" I asked. "What about my life?" The Guardian showed me Jessica and Amanda, safe with their grandmother in Seattle. I saw them growing up, going to college, building their own lives. They would always love their father, but they didn't need him in the same way anymore. I could let them go. I could accept this new purpose. "If I say yes," I said, "what exactly am I agreeing to?" More images, monthly patrols of the sacred areas, watching for violations, reporting to the Guardian when problems arose, keeping the old rituals alive, maintaining the balance between worlds. And in return, the Guardian would watch over me. It would protect me from the dangers of the wilderness, give me strength and knowledge I'd never had before. I would never be alone in the forest again. And if I say no? The Guardian's eyes flashed. I saw myself leaving Cold Creek, taking a job somewhere else. But I also saw what would happen to the valley without a protector. More families like the Hendersons, more violations, more death. The sacred places would be lost forever. I looked at the petroglyphs, at the ancient figures carved into the rock. They seemed to be watching me, waiting for my answer. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about me. It was about keeping something precious alive, something that connected us to the old ways. I accept, I said. The Guardian reached out with one massive hand and touched my forehead. The contact was gentle, almost fatherly. I felt something change inside me, not just in my mind, but in my body, my soul. I was being marked, claimed, transformed. The whiskey cravings disappeared. The Grat, IF that had been eating me alive for 3 years, lifted like fog in the morning sun. I felt stronger, more alive than I had in years. When I opened my eyes, the Guardian was gone. But I could still feel its presence, like a warm hand on my shoulder. I wasn't alone anymore. I was home. That was 40 years ago. I'm telling you this story now because I'm getting old, and someone needs to know the truth. The Park Service thinks I'm just an eccentric old ranger who's been in the woods too long. They have no idea what I really do here. Every month I patrol the sacred areas. I watch for signs of disrespect, for people who don't understand what they're walking into. Most of the time, I can redirect them with stories about bear sightings or trail washouts. Sometimes I have to be more direct. The Guardian and I have an understanding now. It judges, I enforce. It protects, I maintain. We're partners in keeping the old agreements alive. I've learned to sense its presence, to feel when something is wrong in the valley. Sometimes I have dreams about potential violations, warnings that let me prevent problems before they start. The forest talks to me now in ways it never did before. My daughters visit when they can. They're both married now with children of their own. They think their father is a little strange, but they love him anyway. They don't need to know the whole truth. I've met other rangers like me over the years. We don't talk about it much, but we recognize each other. There's a network of us across the country, guardians of the guardians, keeping the sacred places safe. The work isn't easy. The isolation can be hard, and the responsibility weighs on you. But it's necessary work. Some places are older than our understanding. Some things are more important than our convenience. Robert Henderson died because he couldn't respect that. His family survived because they were innocent, just following where he led. The Guardian understood the difference. I've seen what happens when sacred places are lost. I've seen what happens when the old agreements are broken. The land itself suffers, and everything that depends on it suffers too. So I stay, I watch, I protect. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling through the valley, I hear footsteps in the snow, heavy, measured steps circling the cabin. The Guardian is still there, still watching, still making sure I remember my promise. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm grateful. Because some guardians never sleep. Some promises are meant to be kept forever. And some places are worth protecting, no matter what the cost. The forest remembers. The Guardian watches. And the old ways endure. My name is Elizabeth Reeves, and I need to tell you what happened in Devil's Canyon. I'm a wildlife biologist, or I was before everything changed. I've got a PhD from the University of Montana and 17 published papers on predator-prey relationships. I tell you this because what I'm about to share sounds impossible, and I need you to know I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghost stories. I became a park ranger after my divorce in 1976. My ex-husband cheated with one of his graduate students, and the scandal cost me my teaching job. So I ran to the wilderness, as far from people as I could get. That's how I ended up at Devil's Canyon Research Station, 60 miles from Browning, Montana, in the middle of nowhere. The station was perfect for someone like me. Solar-powered, weather monitoring equipment, emergency supplies for months. I could focus on my research without dealing with human drama. I spoke some Blackfoot from working with tribal researchers, and I respected their culture, even if I thought their spiritual beliefs were just interesting folklore. Devil's Canyon itself was a narrow cut carved by ancient glaciers. The walls rose 500 feet straight up, creating a natural wind tunnel. In winter, it was brutal. The Blackfoot called it cursed, said it was a burial ground for warriors. White settlers avoided it completely. I figured that was just superstition keeping people away from a dangerous place. February 1989 brought a record-breaking cold snap. Temperatures hit 40 below zero with 6 feet of snow. The winds reached 60 miles per hour, creating whiteout conditions that could trap you for weeks. Most people would call that hell. I called it perfect working conditions. That's when Dr. Patricia Moonwalker's team went missing. Patricia was 28, half Blackfoot, and brilliant. She was studying winter wildlife adaptation with a team of 4. They'd been radio silent for 3 days when I got the call to check on them. The storm had knocked out satellite communications, but their GPS showed they'd reached base camp. I loaded my snowmobile with emergency gear and headed out. The storm was getting worse, and I knew I might be their only chance. As I rode through the blizzard, something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the forest was too quiet. In 30 years of wilderness work, I'd never heard such complete silence. When I reached their coordinates, I found their camp intact. Tents still standing, equipment running, camp stove burning. But no people. Not a single footprint leading away from camp. It was like they'd just vanished into thin air. The hot food on the stove was still warm. I called out their names as I searched the camp. The wind seemed to swallow my voice, creating strange echoes that sounded like whispers. Patricia's journal lay open on the table. The last entry dated 2 days ago. Her handwriting looked shaky, rushed. Day 12. Something's wrong with the team. Kevin's been eating raw meat, says he can't help it. James won't stop talking about how hungry he is, even right after meals. Maria found human bones in the cave system. Fresh bones. We need to leave, but the storm... The entry ended mid-sentence. I checked their equipment. Digital thermometers were reading impossible temperatures. Some showed 200 degrees, others negative 100. Camera batteries drained in minutes. When I touched the metal equipment, it was so cold it burned my skin through my gloves. Following Maria's notes, I found the cave system about 100 yards from camp. The entrance was hidden behind ice formations, and the smell hit me before I even got close. It was the worst thing I'd ever smelled. Decay, mixed with pine needles, so strong it made me gag. Inside the cave, I found the bones. They were arranged in a circle, definitely human and definitely fresh. The marrow had been extracted with tools, and there were gnaw marks from human teeth. My scientific training kicked, and I documented everything, took photos, collected samples, but my hands were shaking. That's when I found Kevin Morrison's video camera. The last recording showed Kevin talking to the camera, but he looked wrong. His eyes were too wide, his skin pale and stretched tight. Behind him, I could see the cave with its bone circle. Day 11, Kevin said, his voice cracking. I can't stop thinking about it. The hunger. It's not normal hunger. It's like something eating me from the inside. I keep dreaming about eating people. I can taste it even when I'm awake. The camera shook as he held up a piece of raw meat. I found this in the cave. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help myself. He bit into it, blood running down his chin. It tastes so good. So much better than anything else. Then he started speaking in a language I didn't recognize. The words sounded old, harsh, like rocks grinding together. His eyes rolled back, showing only white, and he began to laugh. The sound wasn't human. The recording ended. I stumbled out of the cave, my mind racing. As a scientist, I tried to find rational explanations. Food poisoning, cabin fever, some kind of chemical exposure. But the evidence didn't fit. The bones were too fresh, too clean. And Kevin's behavior. I'd seen people crack under pressure, but not like that. That's when I saw the petroglyphs. They were carved into the rock face near the cave entrance, almost hidden by ice. Ancient Blackfoot symbols showing tall, thin figures consuming humans. Below them, words in Blackfoot I could partially translate. Beware the starving one, the hunger that cannot be filled. The temperature dropped suddenly. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see. And then I heard it. Footsteps in the snow behind me. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be human. I turned around, but nothing was there. Just my own tracks leading to the cave. But the footsteps continued, circling me in the growing darkness. I ran back to camp, my heart pounding. The rational part of my mind said I was panicking, letting the isolation and weird discoveries get to me. But every instinct screamed that something was hunting me. Back at the research station, I tried to radio for help. Static. The satellite phone was dead. Even my emergency beacon wouldn't work. The storm was getting worse, and I was trapped with whatever had happened to Patricia's team. I barricaded myself in the station and reviewed all the evidence. Patricia's journal had more entries I'd missed. She wrote about team members eating raw meat, speaking in unknown languages, and experiencing impossible hunger, despite having plenty of food. She'd started researching Blackfoot folklore about something called the Wendigo. According to her notes, the Wendigo was a cannibalistic spirit that possessed people during harsh winters. It made them crave human flesh, drove them to madness, and grew stronger with each victim. The tribe had bound it to the burial grounds with sacred rituals, but if the site was disturbed, I didn't believe in spirits. But as I read, the station's temperature dropped. My breath misted in the air. Ice formed on the windows from the inside. And I started to feel it. A gnawing emptiness in my stomach that food couldn't fill. A sound outside made me freeze. Scratching. Something large moving around the station. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window. Nothing. But in the snow, I saw tracks. They were human-shaped but wrong. Too long, too deep, with claw marks at the toes. And they were huge. Whatever made them was at least 15 feet tall. The scratching came again, directly above me, on the roof. I grabbed my rifle and waited. The sounds moved across the roof, then down the wall. Something was testing the station, looking for a way in. Then I heard Patricia's voice. Elizabeth? Elizabeth, help me. I'm so cold. I knew it was impossible. Patricia had been missing for days, but her voice was right outside the door, weak and desperate. Everything in me wanted to open that door and help my friend. Please, Elizabeth. I'm hurt. They left me in the cave. I'm so hungry. I looked through the window. Patricia stood in the snow, barely dressed, her skin blue with cold. She shouldn't have been alive, but she was there, real as anything, reaching toward the station with shaking hands. I know what happened to them, she said. I know how to stop it, but you have to let me in. I'm so cold, Elizabeth, so hungry. I moved toward the door, my hand on the lock. Every human instinct told me to help her, but something else, some deeper warning, made me stop. I looked at her more carefully. Patricia's eyes were wrong. They glowed with a pale blue light, and her teeth were too sharp. When she spoke, her breath didn't mist in the cold air, and her hands, they weren't human hands anymore. They were claws. Let me in, Elizabeth. Her voice was changing, becoming deeper, more commanding. You know you want to. You're so alone in there, so scared. I can make it stop. I stepped back from the door. You're not Patricia. The thing outside laughed, and the sound made my bones ache. Smart girl. Patricia was delicious. But she's still here, inside me. Do you want to talk to her? The voice changed again, becoming Patricia's exact tone. Elizabeth, run. It's in the burial cave. The bones, they're not just victims. They're offerings. It's been feeding for... The voice cut off with a scream. Then silence. I waited all night, rifle ready, but nothing else happened. When dawn came, I found Patricia's body in the snow outside the station. She was real, and she was dead. But her face was peaceful, and around her neck was a small medicine bag I recognized from her research. Inside the bag, I found sage, sweetgrass, and a note written in her handwriting. Use these. The old ways work. Trust me. I spent the morning reading everything I could find about Wendigo folklore. According to the stories, the creature was bound to the burial grounds by shamans centuries ago. It could possess the hungry, the desperate, the spiritually weak. It grew stronger with each victim, and in winter it was nearly unstoppable. But it could be fought. The old ways, sage smoke, sweetgrass, traditional prayers, could protect someone with strong enough will. The key was spiritual strength, not physical weapons. I was a scientist. I didn't believe in spirits or magic. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Patricia had died trying to help me. If there was even a chance the old ways worked, I had to try. I gathered sage and sweetgrass from Patricia's supplies. I practiced the Blackfoot prayers I'd learned from my research. It felt foolish, but I was out of rational options. As the sun set, I felt it coming. The temperature dropped, and that impossible hunger returned. This time, it was stronger. My stomach cramped so badly I doubled over. My mouth watered thinking about human flesh, and I understood what had happened to Patricia's team. The Wendigo was trying to possess me. I lit the sage and sweetgrass, creating a circle of smoke around myself. The hunger eased slightly, but I could feel something fighting back, angry, frustrated. It wanted me, and it was getting impatient. Elizabeth, Patricia's voice again, but I knew it wasn't her. You can't hide behind smoke forever. You're already mine. Feel that hunger? That's me, inside you, growing stronger. The creature materialized in the smoke. 15 feet tall, skeletal, with skin like parchment stretched over bones. Its eyes glowed ice blue, and its breath formed crystals in the air. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, but also strangely beautiful in its alien wrongness. Your friends tasted so good, it said, its voice like wind through dead trees. Patricia fought the longest. Even as she ate the others, she kept praying. It made her meat more tender. Rage filled me. This thing had destroyed 4 good people, had made them into monsters before killing them. I stepped forward, still maintaining my protective circle. You're bound to the burial grounds, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The shamans trapped you there. It laughed. Trapped? Child, I've been feeding here for centuries. Every winter someone comes. Explorers, researchers, hunters. They all taste the same, fear and flesh. Then why haven't you left? For the first time, the creature looked uncertain. The old ones, they made certain agreements. As long as I stayed in the sacred places, I could feed. But if I left, you'd lose your power. Its eyes flared. I have power enough to end you, little scientist. Your smoke tricks won't last forever. The sage was burning low. I had minutes before my protection failed. But I understood now. This thing was a predator. And like any predator, it had rules. Boundaries. The burial grounds were both its territory and its prison. Patricia's still alive in there, isn't she? I said. Part of her. That's how you knew so much about me. The creature's form wavered. For a moment, I saw Patricia's face superimposed over its skull features. Help me, she whispered. Then the Wendigo reasserted control. She's mine now, as you will be. The hunger is already in you, Elizabeth. You can feel it growing. Soon you'll be so hungry you'll eat your own fingers to make it stop. It was right. The hunger was getting worse. Even with the sage smoke, I could feel my control slipping. The creature was inside my head now, showing me visions of human flesh, making my mouth water. But I had one advantage. I knew what it wanted most, to possess me completely, to make me another victim, and that gave me power over it. If you want me, I said, come and take me, but you'll have to do it here, in the sacred circle, face to face. The Wendigo snarled and lunged forward, the moment it crossed my protective barrier. I felt its full power hit me like a physical blow. The hunger became overwhelming, and my vision went red with cannibalistic need. But I was ready. I grabbed Patricia's medicine bag and pressed it against the creature's chest. The sage and sweetgrass inside had been blessed by Patricia, made sacred by her sacrifice. The Wendigo screamed and tried to pull away, but I held on. Patricia, help me, I whispered. From somewhere inside the creature, I felt her respond. Her will, her strength, her determination to save me. Together we fought the Wendigo from both sides. Me from without, her from within. The creature began to dissolve, its form breaking apart like smoke. But as it died, it tried to drag me with it. I felt my consciousness being pulled into whatever dark place it came from. Patricia's voice, clear and strong. Let go, Elizabeth. Trust the old ways. Trust me. I released my grip and fell backward. The Wendigo's scream echoed through the canyon, then faded to nothing. The impossible hunger vanished, leaving me empty but free. Patricia stood before me, translucent but real. It's over, she said. For now. But the burial grounds are still sacred, still dangerous. Others will come. How do I stop them? She smiled sadly. You don't. You warn them. You protect the old ways. And you remember, science can't explain everything. She faded away, leaving me alone in the circle of dying sage smoke. I found the remains of Patricia's team in the burial cave. They'd been arranged with respect, their bodies intact, despite what the Wendigo had made them do. I radioed for help once the storm passed and told the authorities they'd died of exposure. The official report blamed wildlife attack and severe weather, but I knew the truth. And I knew my responsibility. I work with the Blackfoot Tribal Council now, monitoring Devil's Canyon and other sacred sites. I carry sags, sweetgrass, and traditional protection items. I've learned the old prayers, the old ways of thinking about the world. My colleagues think I've gone native, lost my scientific objectivity. They're not entirely wrong. The woman who went into Devil's Canyon was a rigid rationalist who thought she could explain everything. The woman who came out knows better. I still do research, still publish papers, but now I study the intersection of science and spiritual truth. I've learned that indigenous peoples preserved knowledge that my culture dismissed as superstition. They understood things about the natural world that we're only beginning to rediscover. The Wendigo is still out there, bound to the burial grounds but waiting. Every winter, someone thinks they can handle Devil's Canyon. Researchers, thrill seekers, people like me who think knowledge is enough to protect them. I try to warn them. I've written papers on the psychological effects of isolation, the dangers of winter camping, the importance of respecting indigenous sacred sites. Most people don't listen. They think I'm just another scientist who cracked under pressure. But sometimes someone does listen. Someone heeds the warnings, stays away from the canyon, respects the old boundaries. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Last week I got a call about another missing research team. This time it was Devil's Canyon. Different researchers, same story. Ambitious scientists who thought they could handle anything nature threw at them. I loaded my snowmobile with emergency gear and headed out. Not to rescue them. I knew it was already too late for that. But to bear witness. To remember. To make sure the old ways survive. Because Patricia was right. Science can't explain everything. Some hungers can never be satisfied. And if we forget the old warnings, if we stop respecting the sacred places, we'll all become the next meal. The Wendigo is patient. It's been waiting for centuries, and it can wait for centuries more. But it's always hungry, and every winter, someone new comes to feed it. I just hope I'm strong enough to keep warning them, to keep the old ways alive. To remember that some things are more important than knowledge, even if it costs me everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Elizabeth Reeves. I'm a park ranger, a scientist, and a guardian of things that shouldn't exist but do. And I'm telling you this story because someday you might need to remember it. Stay away from Devil's Canyon. Respect the old warnings. And if you ever feel an impossible hunger in the depths of winter, remember, some appetites are not your own. The Wendigo is still out there, still hungry, still waiting, and winter always comes again.